Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of What If Naruto was a Sensory-Nin and became the head of Root. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 5. 7-year-old Naruto Uzumaki sat in his own apartment practicing his sealing. He had moved out of the Sarutobi compound a year ago after the resentment from the civilian sector had started to increase. Tension had been building throughout Konoha for years, and with the escalation of the distrust between the village and the Uchiha, a select few had become very vocal about their dislike for the demon brat. Not that anyone uttered that in public, that is. But, when Naruto had noticed that his adopted family had been suffering for their loyalty to him, he had moved out on his own initiative. Hiruzen had tried to talk him out of it, and even Asuma had tried to convince him to stay. Young Konohamaru had been bawling on the day Naruto had moved out, but had managed to calm down when Naruto promised to visit and bring him over to his apartment to visit on a regular basis. It was unspoken throughout the village, but widely known, that the Sarutobi clan was fiercely protective of the Jinchuriki, and he of them. Even those who looked down on Naruto wouldn't speak poorly of the Sarutobi to his face. The villagers had learned that lesson a long time ago. He was an anomaly to the village. It had been years ago that the rumors of his strange behavior had circulated, and Naruto had learned how to act more socially acceptable now. Naruto was seen quite frequently during the day throughout the village. Going on walks, buying groceries, the like. Little did anyone know the true intent of his public ventures. Being shunned was the perfect cover for a spy who scanned the emotions of everyone he ran into. Naruto had retrieved invaluable data for the Hokage and the village's benefit. The entire village was under scrutiny and none of them knew it. Well, that wasn't entirely true. He had to be careful not to scan any Yamanaka too deeply. Inoichi had stormed into the Hokage's office a few months back, warning him that a shinobi had infiltrated the village and was looking into people's minds. It was embarrassing to have been caught for him and the Hokage both in a shinobi village. Nothing built distrust more than getting caught spying on your own subjects. Luckily for them, Inoichi had been brought up to speed and a story of a new counter-espionage training had been fabricated. It was good, but every so often a Yamanaka would try to pin down his location and he'd have to evade them for a handful of hours. The last one had been quite persistent and had nearly chased him down for a whole day. Apparently, the training was doing wonders for the Yamanaka's abilities, but it was annoying for Naruto all the same. While Naruto walked around during the day, Agent Konoha would appear in the nights. Thanks to the tensions between the Uchiha and the Hokage, he and Weasel had been tasked as the mediators between the two parties. Itachi would spy for the council, and Naruto would accompany him to the Uchiha compound and read what he could from the emotions of the meetings. Things had progressively gotten worse and worse. The Uchiha were entertaining thoughts of rebellion. Of all the plans they could have come to, they had to decide upon the most suicidal. Kurama was of the opinion that it was the only choice and Uchiha would make the worst one. His opinions on Uchiha had not changed much over the years. Though, he had grown to accept Itachi in Naruto's life. Naruto's training had been intensified as well. At 7 years old, he deserved his status as an Anbu agent. That being said, he was still a long ways from the level of Kakashi or Itachi. He had been raised on the models put in place during the Second and Third Great Shinobi Wars. Kakashi and Itachi had even put him under mock missions, resembling ones that they had undergone in their own tours of duty. Naruto rarely disappointed. His performance in the Konoha Bridge exercise had made Kakashi's guilt and grief shrink down until it was almost unnoticeable for weeks afterward. Kurama said that meant Kakashi had been proud. It was the Hokage who had given Naruto his latest mission sealing. Apparently, they had reached a stopping point in his training, at least for a while. The Hokage was adamant that Naruto would not be pushed too hard. That his progress was outstanding, but he desired his young ward to take some time to reflect and hone his techniques. Naruto understood the reasonings. His body had just started growing, and it would change his taijutsu. As his body grew, his chakra would as well, and only constant control exercises would maintain the levels of control he had grown accustomed to. Therefore, the Hokage had taken this time to be used to further his learnings in new areas and avenues. Sealing was the first of his new subjects and also the hardest. Naruto greatly enjoyed it. It was soothing and felt natural. He knew that his parents had been sealing prodigies, and practicing the art made him feel closer to them. That alone was enough for him to obsess over the art after only a week of instruction. He had also spent more time at the Hokage's side, as Agent Konoha. Learning from observing everything. Mission assignments, council meetings, advisor meetings, the paperwork that ran the village, and he had even taken to transcribing the Hokage's private correspondences. The young shinobi did his best to do his leader and grandfather figure proud. It made his own pride feel warm and strong. It was quite an addictive emotion. Naruto-kun. Naruto looked up to see Itachi sitting in his windowsill, tense and harried. Emotional. He did not often see his mentor like this, and he immediately rose to his feet. Itachi-sensei. What? Get ready. We have to leave. Now. Get your mask. Naruto's body went into autopilot as it had been trained to, as he grabbed the stack of exploding notes he had just finished creating and grabbed the mask that was on his hip. It was cold professionalism that washed over him as he wordlessly followed his superior's lead, out the window and across the village. They headed out away from the village, past the wall, and towards the river to the east. He didn't know if this was another mock mission or an actual mission, but either way it didn't matter. He would do what he'd have to. They ran for half an hour before Itachi suddenly stopped. Naruto stopped beside him, and silently awaited for the words of his mentor. The early morning sun was just starting to breach through the upper branches of the trees, but he felt no comfort from the light. Something was terribly wrong. My friend, Shisui, is in trouble. I believe that Root is after him. I'm sorry to ask for your assistance, but I can't trust anyone else. If there's fighting, I don't want you to get involved, but take Shisui and leave. Understood. Naruto bit down on his instinctual refusal, buried his demand to fight alongside his teacher, his brother, and nodded. If he wanted to help at all, he had to follow the rules. He had promised that he'd never lie to Itachi again. He would stick to that promise. Itachi turned away and took off again. As they neared a clearing, Itachi signaled Naruto to peel off to the side and he obeyed. It was evident that a fight had recently been fought here. The environment clearly showed signs of an intense jutsu trade-off. Scorch marks and cuts in trees that resembled marks from wind nature chakra. Shisui and Danzo himself. That was hardly a good sign. There were other markers of additional combatants, but that made sense. Danzo never traveled alone. He slowly made his way alongside the bottom of the gorge, nearest the river. He could sense Itachi above, talking to someone else. It could only be Shisui. He could not hear them, but his empathy was enough for him to understand the gist of what was going on. Danzo had believed Shisui using his Sharingan to stop the coup was a waste. Danzo had stolen something of great worth, one of Shisui's eyes. Naruto couldn't believe that a dojutsu could be that coveted, before he remembered the stories of Madara. Alongside the rumors that a Sharingan could control the Biju, a rumor which Kurama had grudgingly verified. The Kyuubi attack was indeed orchestrated by an Uchiha, but not one that was in the village. Shisui continued, and Naruto felt his heart drop for Itachi. The coup would not be stopped. Root was involved, conflict was imminent now. He felt Itachi's bottomless sorrow grow as Shisui turned from him and urged him to kill him. Naruto wasn't fast enough, couldn't move or do anything, before the part of Itachi that Naruto always admired, the part that was selfless and served the village before everything and anything, urged him forwards until Shisui was unconscious and falling into the gorge. Naruto leapt off the wall and caught the body before it could land upon the rocks below. He quickly brought the body up to Itachi. As he came within sight of his brother, his older brother who had always protected him, he saw sorrow in his eyes. Sorrow that he had only ever sensed deep within the Uchiha. And as his eyes slowly changed from the foreign shape they had been in, he watched as Itachi cried for the first time he had ever known him. The Uchiha quickly turned away from Naruto and stood tall. Take care of the body, Konoha-kun. He deserves to be found by his family. I will inform the Hokage. He was gone before Naruto could say anything, before he could try to comfort him. Before he could tell him of the spark of life that was still within Shisui Uchiha's chest. He felt conflicted. Would it be a lie to save Shisui? Did he have the right to risk everything to save this man? Was it selfish if he only debated it because of what it would mean to Itachi? No, above everything else, Shisui Uchiha was a shinobi of the leaf. Besides, he had been ordered to take care of the body. He would do everything in his power to do so. Kurama. Before he could even finish his question, a slow trickle of the Kyuubi's chakra flooded out of his hands and into the body of the dying man, crude and inefficient without Naruto guiding it, but he had yet to learn medical ninjutsu. He alone couldn't save Shisui's life. But he knew someone that could. Kabuto was hard at work filing paperwork over all of the patients he had seen that morning when a faint smell wafted from down the hallway. One of the first things he had gained when working underneath Orochimaru was exercises and rituals that could enhance the senses a person relied upon. Miso ramen. He had grown quite familiar with the food as of late. It was apparently for him, as a brown-haired girl rapped a knuckle on the open door of his office and greeted him. "Hello. Kabuto-san. I have your order of miso ramen." He smiled and thanked her as if he had ordered it himself, and paid her for the meal. As she walked away, he quickly grabbed the styrofoam bowl and left his work as it was. He had been summoned. His new leader finally had a use of him. Kabuto had supplied weekly reports to the young shinobi, but he had wondered when he would first be called upon to serve beyond information. In truth, he had not believed that he would be called upon so soon. He made his way to a nearby park that had a play structure, with dozens of small children screaming and playing around it. Children were some of the best camouflage. Their innocence tended to bleed into the surroundings they frequented. Nobody noticed as he walked past a statue and didn't appear from the other side of it. Secret entrances didn't always have to be flashy after all. The walk down the hallway wasn't very long. It had used to be covered in dust, but after Naruto had shown an interest in using the hideout, they had refurbished it. Orochimaru had dozens of bases scattered around Konoha before he fled, and the masses only knew of a select few. The Anbu knew of the majority of them. Kabuto had known of all of them. Naruto had been excited to learn of the 3 bases that had yet to be found, even by the Hokage. They were quite small, but privacy is something that could never be priced high enough. Especially within a shinobi village. When he walked in, he expected to see his master. He had not anticipated a body, stripped and bleeding out on one of the tables, surgical tools prepped and readied. "Naruto-sama, you didn't have to get me a gift." He enjoyed the annoyance his joke seemed to inspire in the young shinobi. "Kabuto-kun. This is Uchiha Shisui. I need you to save him. Please." Kabuto made his way to the fallen Uchiha and looked him over. There were questions on his tongue, but the body would answer some of them. He saw lacerations common with finely channeled wind chakra. Internal bleeding. Bruising that was common with broken ribs. 2 missing eyes. I must confess, Naruto-sama, that there isn't much of a body left. It's important that I know. Do you want me to merely preserve his life to gain information? Or save it entirely? The way that the boy's eyes darkened with anger sent a shiver down his spine. He knew before the boy even opened his mouth. The realization of such caused Naruto pause and then sigh. "Why do you tease me? It isn't nice. Shisui is a true shinobi of the leaf. I won't let him die." The boy had found quite the opportunity, it seemed. Kabuto had been informed already of the situation with the Uchiha. Shisui had been tasked with spying on Itachi, but had defected to the village the same as the prodigy of the Uchiha. Even if his life was saved right now, his life in the light of Konoha was over. The Uchiha would never accept him and Danzo wouldn't let him live. Even the Hokage would be hard-pressed to trust him. He had gotten in too deep. Kabuto washed his hands and begun his work. "I'll take it from here, Naruto-sama. I'll notify you when the operation is complete." The boy nodded to him and hugged him from behind. "Thank you, Kabuto-kun. Thank you." Kabuto watched the young Uzumaki leave and in that moment found his loyalty had been cemented. Whatever doubts he had about serving the boy were gone, ashes, and in their place unmovable loyalty. The will of fire, reignited and blazing as strong as the sun. In that moment he wished that the boy could have felt the emotion he had inspired within him. As the moment passed, he went about saving an Uchiha's life. Shisui Uchiha didn't know it yet, but he owed his life to the young Naruto Uzumaki. It was a fact. If the boy had not been there, the Uchiha's body would have washed up farther down the river, long dead. Kabuto would make sure he would see that debt paid. He alone wouldn't be enough to serve the boy, they would need more soldiers. For whatever cause Naruto pursued. Kakashi waited silently as the Anbu squad leaders gave their reports. The tension that had been brewing in the village after the Kyuubi incident had never been worse. Fights were breaking out between civilians and the Uchiha police force, and there had been casualties on both sides. The other clans saw the signs and had ostracized the Uchiha and had fanned the flames of the tensions even more. More Hyuga were being requested for jobs from long-standing Uchiha-favored customers. The Uchiha had not been invited to the daimyo's palace for a wedding of the daimyo's cousin, and the civilian council had approved trade practices that undercut Uchiha business. The entirety of the village was turning against them. The Uchiha were not the only threat to the village at the time. Kakashi knew that periods of civil unrest were the perfect time for sabotage and espionage. Anbu had been working tirelessly to mitigate any outside influence in their current state of crisis. Kumogakure had increased correspondence with Iwagakure since the treaty, and reports had claimed that Kurigakure was slowly degrading into a civil war due to bloodline purging instilled by the Yondaime Mizukage. Relations with Sunagakure had slowed and grown colder as the daimyo of Wind had suddenly started sending more jobs to Konoha. The five great nations were slowly reaching a very dangerous point. If the situation in Konoha did not stabilize soon, then he wouldn't be surprised if a fourth great shinobi war were to begin. He'd do his best to minimize that chance. The Uchiha needed to be settled. Unfortunately, the Hokage was slowly losing hope for a peaceful resolution. Rumors were spreading that Shisui Uchiha had disappeared. Apparently, the Uchiha elders had tasked him with overseeing Itachi, and now believed the Prodigy to be a spy. While they weren't wrong, it ruined any chance the Hokage had to use Itachi peacefully. Agent Konoha had been quite useful in discovering that intelligence. He was also very helpful in identifying the force that had supplied further evidence of Shisui's demise to the Uchiha elders' route. Danzo had become more active, more than he had been in nearly a decade. Uchiha, Danzo, Kumogakure, Iwagakure, Kurigakure, Sunagakure. The village had to be aware of all possible threats. Even ones that had grown quiet, such as Orochimaru. Agent Konoha had somehow discovered a few of the Snake Sanin's spies, and while the Hokage had attributed it to his empathy, Kakashi suspected that there was more to it than that. He had no problem with allowing his younger brother his secrets, though. He had more than earned the right to keep them. Naruto had exceeded all of their expectations, and yet worried him all the same. Naruto was the future of Konoha itself. A very promising candidate for the title of Hokage. His skill as a shinobi was being harnessed beautifully. It was his social skills that Kakashi worried about. He had noticed in conversations that Naruto was slowly starting to focus more on the negative aspects of people he did not know. Kakashi blamed the empathy. It made it hard for the boy to see the good in people. In all people. He couldn't be blamed for it, though. How could you believe in something when all that you saw was the opposite? While concerns of the village plagued his mind, so too did concerns for the young Uzumaki. What would happen if Naruto were to ever lose faith in the people of the village? If he decided that the people of Konoha were too twisted and cruel, that they didn't deserve his protection? It may be a stretch, but it was important to identify worst-case scenarios in his line of work. If he was being honest with himself, the worst-case scenario for Konoha would see him at Naruto's side against them. For if the boy ever truly decided that he was better off without the village, then how could Kakashi deny his logic? How could he abandon him? Those who broke the rules were trash. Those who abandoned their friends were worse than trash. But Naruto was family. Kakashi had turned his back on his family once, on his father. He didn't have it in him to make that mistake again. Hopefully, he would be able to avert that possibility and find some way to nurture Naruto's humanity. Of course, that would have to be after Kakashi took care of the power-hungry ninja villages that would see their village burn. He would see them all beaten and bloody. He was no Inuzuka, but he was a Hatake. The Hatake of old were known for their determination to protect their clan. Their family. Kakashi would remind all of the elemental nations just who, exactly, the Hatake were if he had to. Naruto was down in the safe house watching Kabuto take care of the sleeping Shisui. The Uchiha was peaceful, thanks to the sedative. If not for that, then he would have awakened by now. Naruto had asked for Kabuto to keep him under just a bit longer, so as to plan out what to actually do with him. He had just returned with some food for the both of them, and had started eating as he thought. Kabuto-kun, how long will rehabilitation take him? The medic shrugged, and cleaned his glasses. Hard to say, Naruto-sama. His injuries were quite extensive and the loss of his eyes will delay any progress to combat for quite a substantial amount of time. The psychological damage, well, I don't know how bad it will be. Naruto nodded as he ate his sandwich. What should I do with him? The gray-haired spy turned and looked at him. That's a loaded question. What do you want? What are you working towards? I want to be the Hokage. Naruto pouted as Kabuto laughed. What? I do. Believe it. That's not enough for you. It's also just a part of what you want. I can tell you want more than a hat in a figurehead position. Naruto blinked. The response had been so honest. It made him think about what he wanted and he thought back to his meeting with B, and what he said about the Jinchuriki. I want to save the Biju. Naruto, you don't have to. Ignoring Kurama, Naruto's eyes steeled and he nodded to Kabuto. I want to save the Biju. Naruto couldn't help but be impressed at the grin that came over Kabuto's face. The man wasn't afraid at all and Naruto knew the weight of what he'd just declared. Now that's a worthy goal. You will need influence outside of Konoha in order to achieve that. You will need agents and allies, both within and outside the village. If discovered, you will be labeled a traitor. Until I become Hokage. He had thought long and hard about it. The shinobi system as a whole was responsible for the treatment of the Biju, and it would have to be torn out root and stem. It was a disgusting balance of financial and martial domination and it only bred hatred and bloodshed. If not for those close to him, he would have believed that every human was implicit in its continuation. The evil within every man, woman, and even child could cloud his senses at times. His education made him believe that such a shift would take monumental action, a great catalyst. Moving slowly would allow for more pacifistic approaches, but he only had a single lifetime to do what 3 great shinobi wars couldn't accomplish: peace. He would be the one that lead the world into its next great step towards true peace. United under one banner, one people. A paradise for all sentient beings, where Biju and human could live side by side. Becoming a kage was the first logical step. Well, you'll still have to answer to the daimyo. No. I know where you're trying to lead me. And I understand. That's something that we can talk about in the future. Naruto smiled and held out a sandwich to Kabuto. For now, let's just eat. And then we can go back to deciding upon the fate of the blind Uchiha. It's the only good kind of Uchiha, kid. A blind one. Naruto gave a mental snort as he shook his head. You're forgetting Itachi, Kurama. Itachi sighed as Naruto once again failed to strike him with his kunai. You should be doing better than this, Naruto-kun. Your training may have been put on hold, but you are clearly not giving this fight your full attention. Naruto gasped for breath as he sat down where he had stood. I'm sorry, Itachi-senpai. He closed his eyes and laid back on the ground. A cool breeze blew through the trees, rustling the leaves. For a while, that was the only sound. Then, Itachi sat down beside him. Naruto-kun, I believe you have something you want to talk about. It's been troubling you all day. I don't want to lose you. Itachi looked at his young protege, and smiled softly. You know that I can't promise you will never lose me, or shinobi, Naruto-kun. I know that. But, with the Uchiha I just. Before he could say any more, Itachi decided to stop him by running his hand through the boy's hair. You're younger than I was, when I first joined the Anbu. You remind me of myself in many ways. But, I don't think I can ever come close to how noble and honorable you are. I want you to promise me that you'll leave the Uchiha clan to me. I know what a promise means to you. I need you to do this for me. He wasn't surprised when the boy grew silent and refused to make eye contact. His own smile widened in reply. We can't promise things that we know we can't do. I know that you have your mind set on helping, but Agent Konoha cannot assist me when the time comes. Itachi saw the boy's eyes widen in fear as he finally sensed the guilt that Itachi had hidden deep within himself. And no, you don't mean to, you can't. I do. I will kill the Uchiha clan. And when I do, Agent Konoha must do his best to finish me. Naruto immediately sat up and slammed his fist into Itachi's chest. No. You can't. I won't let you all stop you. It has to be done, Naruto-kun. It's okay. I've taught you everything I can. It's up to you now, to grow strong on your own initiative. No. You can't just leave me. Itachi had seen Naruto cry many times, but he believed this was the first time he had caused the boy to weep. The Uzumaki latched onto him and embraced him tightly. "I'll be lost without you." He pulled the boy closer and rested his chin upon his head. "I know. I know it's scary, but you won't be alone. You're strong now. You have everything you need to be a great shinobi. I believe in you, and I need you to trust in me. I must do this to save my brother. Can you look after him for me, when I'm gone? Can you watch Sasuke?" The blonde-haired boy looked up at him with tears streaming down his face and slowly nodded. "You have to promise to see come back someday. You have to promise to try." The boy's fingers began to tear into his clothing in desperation, and though he knew he shouldn't, he felt the words leave his mouth before he could stop them. "I promise, Naruto. I promise that I'll try." "You did what?" Hiruzen quietly growled out at his advisors as they sat across from him. Homura and Kaharu couldn't help the tension they experienced from his outburst, but Danzo seemed nonplussed. "I ordered the go-ahead for the operation. Itachi will do his duty as a leaf nin and eradicate the Uchiha within a single night. Quick and painless, and no risk for collateral damage. No civilian losses. We will lose the reputation of the Uchiha clan, but it's imperative that we prune the bush." "That wasn't your call, Danzo. I am the Hokage, and I have let the situation get out of hand." Danzo glared back with equal anger. "Your drive and strength has rekindled these past few years, but your heart is still too soft. They have chosen their path and Uchiha are stubborn. Foolish. Would you see our enemies tear us apart because you couldn't bear to make the hard call? Finding peace is the hard call, Danzo. You're taking the easy way out. The destruction of an entire clan is unprecedented. I will not be the Hokage who ordered the deaths of a founding clan." Danzo leaned back. "You will not be remembered as such either." Anyone else would have been confused by Danzo's words, but Hiruzen knew his old friend well enough to immediately understand what he meant. "How dare you?" Even he could not stop his muscles from tensing at the killing intent they leveled at each other. He swiped a hand forward and an Anbu guard left the room to dissuade the shinobi in the vicinity from believing that the Hokage was under attack. He took a moment to take a breath and sat back down with sorrowful eyes. This was the ugly side of running a village. He had done his best to lead honorably and justly, to strive for peace and transparency. He had kept Danzo around, even ignored his actions in the shadows at times if only out of respect for the bond the two of them had. Was that a mistake? Was this just another instance in which his inaction would haunt him? Taunt him for his mistakes? You condemn a boy who loves his family, to not only kill his entire clan but to then take up the mantle of a rogue terrorist. Disavow his actions. Label him a traitor. I ask a shinobi to do his duty for the village he loves above all else. Hiruzen could see no sign of regret in his old friend's eyes. He saw a strained calm. A nervousness. Hiruzen was then acutely aware that Naruto was not at his side. He had grown accustomed to the boy's insights during these meetings and now, he was just realizing that maybe his behavior had been noticed. It wasn't necessary that the boy attend every meeting, but this was the first time in a long time that he wasn't there for a meeting with Danzo. A quick glance showed that Homura and Kaharu were also nervous. Not of a fight, but of discovery. Hiruzen felt his heart stop and he turned to the windows in a panic, looking desperately over his village as the sun slowly set. It was so peaceful, so calm. Yes, Sarutobi. It is to be done, tonight. Chapter 6. Sasuke stopped in front of the gates to the Uchiha compound in confusion. Something was wrong. The gates were left slightly open, and the compound was quiet. The Uchiha weren't the most exuberant of people, and even Sasuke knew that recently things had been odd within his clan. But this wasn't right. Something was wrong. He walked into the compound and gagged as the smell of blood filled his nose. His eyes watered as he saw bodies laying in the street. Everything blurred together as he stumbled to the closest body and turned it over to reveal one of his neighbors. The elderly man's neck had been cut down to the bone and he recoiled as one of the neck tendons flopped out of the dead man's neck and onto his hand. Sasuke fell back and tried to catch his breath before he paused. He looked down the street towards his house and saw the lights flickering inside. He ran. Sasuke made it into his house and heard sobbing. He slowly made his way up the stairs, the sounds from his parents' room making his skin grow cold and his chest tighten. The air evaded his attempts at trying to catch his breath until he opened the door and saw his brother standing over his bleeding parents, his sword ready to execute their mother. Itachi looked over and locked his gaze with him. Sasuke could only stare in horror at his brother's twisted Sharingan that shed tears of blood. His brother was expressionless as his Sharingan, his wrong and evil Sharingan, twisted and spun, and suddenly he was in a world of negative light. Shadows were bright white, and what would be light was dark black. He could still see everything, and he could only sob as he watched his brother slaughter his entire clan. Hate me, Sasuke. That is the only way you could ever hope to kill me. Hate me. No. Ni-san. Sasuke was cut off as Itachi stabbed his sword through his chest. Then you'll remain the helpless child that watched his parents die. Suddenly, the world was back in focus, and Sasuke watched as his surroundings slowly cleared, heard their mother shrieking for him to look away, watched as their father attempted to use a jutsu before being backhanded into the floor. Watched his brother move in for the kill. He watched as a strange Anbu, shorter than himself, burst through the window and swiped at his brother. Itachi languidly stepped back and readied his blade. Ah, so the Hokage caught on to my plan. Of course he would send you, Konoha. You're the only one who would have a chance to stop me. Itachi Uchiha, you are charged with treason, murder, and crimes against a founding clan of Konoha. Surrender. Sasuke yearned for his brother to drop his sword. For him to stop this. To turn back into the brother that he loved, that taught him how to use his shuriken and kunai, that was proud of him when his father was disappointed. To turn back into his hero and not this monster. His brother cried more tears of blood as he dashed forwards to the lone Anbu who tried to stop him. He wanted this madness to end. He wanted his brother back. Naruto felt nothing as he countered Itachi's blade with his kunai. He didn't allow himself to feel the emotions that were straining against his training and willpower. His anger at being forced to fight the man he saw and loved as an older brother was channeled into his strikes, and in truth it was not Itachi he was fighting, but the world. His love for the Uchiha held his heart in a vice grip and clenched painfully, even as he coldly leveled his own killing intent at him. His loneliness cried out deafeningly as he continually sensed the deep depression that Itachi was sinking deeper and deeper into. Each strike sent painful shocks into his arms as their blades connected, and it was the only thing Naruto could do to strike faster and faster, the pain being the only thing grounding him in the moment. This was the greatest test the universe could have contrived to set against him. There was no scenario in which Naruto didn't lose something of incredible worth. He was extremely lucky that he had the maturity of mind to channel any hopelessness or desperation into the fight. He buried his heart and became the weapon he was trained to be. He flipped through the air, grabbing Sasuke by the collar and dragging him out of the range of a fireball. It hit the ground and Sasuke cried out as the heat exploded out and burnt them both. Naruto didn't flinch through the pain as he was too busy deflecting the knives his mentor was sending towards Sasuke with terrifying accuracy. Kurama. Naruto mentally shouted to his closest ally. The fox was quick in flooding Naruto's body with a tail's worth of chakra, and Naruto moved forward even as he counted down in his head. Itachi dodged his flurry of strikes with liquid grace, before his red eyes flashed as their eyes caught sight of each other. The genjutsu he had been entrapped within was broken almost instantaneously by Kurama, though that instant where his chakra fluctuated was all that was needed for Itachi to move into a grapple and launch Naruto into the side of the building. Naruto coughed and slowly pulled himself free as he watched Itachi move towards his bleeding mother. The clan head house was slowly catching fire, and Sasuke stood trembling between his elder brother and his beaten and broken parents. Naruto grunted as he felt his limbs become flooded with Kurama's chakra once more. He had no hope of beating Itachi, all he could do was waste his time. He knew as he dashed forwards, that even with a single tail of Biju chakra, trying to stop Itachi was like trying to move a mountain with a single earth dragon jutsu. An endeavor in futility. Still, there was only him between the extinction of the Uchiha clan and Itachi. He barely managed to get in front of Sasuke and kick out, forcing Itachi to take a step back. He pushed forwards, kicking and punching, trying to hold on to his momentum with all he had. He was forced to rely upon his boosted healing faculties as Itachi inflicted wound after wound. He couldn't fight defensively, he could only minimize damage and leave as small of openings as possible. Itachi cut his arm yet again, and Naruto gritted his teeth. Itachi dashed forwards in an attempt to reverse the momentum, and Naruto skipped back before flinging a handful of seals in the air. Itachi only had a moment before the exploding notes and flash seals ignited. The force of the blast sent both of them back and did damage to the structural integrity of the building. Naruto flung kunai and shuriken as he had been taught as efficiently as he could at the most likely routes his opponent would attempt to take to get to him. He heard the clang of metal colliding to the left and turned to face his foe, before he felt the jerk of his chakra fluctuating to dispel genjutsu. He couldn't even think as his body jerked to the side to dodge the attack from his blind spot he felt in his bones was coming. He couldn't move fast enough to dodge the blast of fire that impacted where he had been standing less than a second ago, but he forced his burning and smoking body to move. He could feel his skin cracking and falling off from how forceful he turned around to engage Itachi. Only to find that 3 different copies of his sensei were closing in on him. He roared and ran to meet them head on, trading blows and dispelling one before he found himself knocked into the air and falling onto his back. His breath was knocked out of his lungs. Then he watched as 2 kunai speared through his hands and into the floorboards. He felt the blade slice right between his bones and his muscles spasm as the blade cleaved tendons and muscle alike. He screamed and his vision went white from the pain. He could feel his body trying to heal around the wounds, and the burn from his cells unable to regenerate was worse than the initial pain itself. Tears ran down his face as even then he sensed the utter despair around him. Sasuke's fear of his own brother, the waking Makoto's fear of seeing her eldest son kill her youngest child, and Itachi's utter despair at the pain he had inflicted unto Naruto and what he was about to do in front of his brother. Sasuke shut his eyes and screamed as Itachi swung his sword at his helpless mother. At the last moment, Fugaku threw himself in front of his wife in a final act of love and sacrifice. The Uchiha patriarch whispered something to his eldest son, but Naruto couldn't hear it. All the negative feelings and the pain became too much for him. He roared once more and tore his hands forward, splitting them in half from the center of his palms and rushed towards Itachi. Blood was pouring from his hands and the force of his running was keeping the separated flesh apart, which was only lengthening the regeneration period. His healing was powerful, but even he had limits. Luckily, it seemed that the move had caught even Itachi off balance, and before he could move away, his dying father had grabbed hold of him and held tight. Naruto barreled into Itachi's side and launched him away from his family. The fire had grown out of control and the roof began to collapse. Naruto kept his senses alert as the smoke clouded his vision. He could hear Sasuke crying and shaking his father behind him as his mother struggled to pull him to safety. Beyond the smoke he saw shapes moving and he readied his stance. His hands had joined back together, but there was no skin, only bone and muscle moving into the clawed stance of the monkey fist. The shapes paused before they seemed to shift and disappear. He stayed still, and suddenly they returned. He leapt into action, jumping through the smoke and slashed at the closest figure, only to stop at the last second as he came mask to mask with Boar. Konoha, stand down. Naruto stepped back and silently checked the newcomer's identity. He nodded when he was satisfied that they weren't imposters and looked to the survivors of Itachi's family. They need help. You do too, kid. Your hands. Naruto leapt out of the building before he could hear the last of the order, and made his way to the nearby roof. His hands slowly regrew his skin, the nerves burning as if they had been submerged in acid. The pain swirled through him and clouded his vision, but he was too busy searching for Itachi. He couldn't sense him within his range. So Naruto channeled Kurama's chakra straight into his empathy. It was like opening his eyes for the first time. His range grew tenfold, and through all of the white noise of the village and the trauma of the Uchiha, he could sense Itachi making his way out of the village. Then he was gone. There was a few seconds of peace before Naruto realized that he had been crying. The tears had run down his mask and had cleared paths through the blood and the grime. He sensed Cat behind him, looking over him silently. He closed his eyes and willed himself to stop crying, but the tears wouldn't end. Konoha. His eyes opened at her voice and he stopped channeling the chakra to his empathy. As his range died down, he found that the tears stopped as well. That didn't mean his heart was any less broken. Come, Cat. I sensed intruders who intend to make off with some Sharingan. It seems there are some conspirators still within the village. Hiruzen, release us, this is pointless. Sarutobi did not move from the window. Minutes after he had realized the plot that had been hatched underneath his nose, reports had come in. The Uchiha clan had been nearly completely massacred. It was quite impressive, in a truly horrible way. It had been too clean. Not only was the clan compound hit, but so was the Uchiha police force HQ. Itachi was skilled, but he could not have done this alone. His Anbu were patrolling in full force, he was just waiting on Konoha to return. Kaharu was about to voice another complaint when the four of them sensed the presence of an emotional shinobi approaching. The aura of killing intent radiated from down the stairs and it commanded silence from the four village elders. They had fought throughout the three shinobi wars, and this presence would have given them pause even in their prime. A young boy slowly opened the door, tears dripping down his Anbu mask. He silently moved past Kaharu and Homura and set down a handful of bloodied and chipped masks on the table in front of Danzo. The two looked at each other in silence, and it was only then that the Hokage turned around. Only then did he break his silence. When I became Hokage, Danzo, I allowed you to form root in an attempt to cover my shortcomings, my weakness, my inability to put the village ahead of my conscience. I've turned a blind eye to your movements. To the crimes you've committed against the village itself. No more. Root is done. Danzo gritted his teeth, but before he could reply, the empty gaze of Agent Konoha stopped him. The child still shed tears, and Danzo would have been disgusted by the pathetic show of emotion if it didn't somehow unsettle him. 15. That's how many underground bunkers you have. You have scrolls hidden around the village containing supplies and classified documents, in 47 locations. You have agents within every major clan, including the Sarutobi. You have illegal dealings with every major criminal syndicate. You are guilty of treason dozens of times over. You ordered agents to steal your Sharingan, to go along with the one you stole from Shisui Uchiha. You take orphans and pair them up as you train them. You force them to kill their partner to graduate training. You've worked with Hanzo the Salamander and you remain in contact with Orochimaru of the Sannin. Do you deny anything? Danzo calmly shifted his eyes to look at his long-term rival and one-time friend. I did what I did for Konoha. You need me still, Hiruzen. No, we need Root. I won't deny that, not yet. But you have become too bitter, jaded, and willful. You have put your own interests before the village's interests, don't try to argue that. Kaharu and Homura remained silent as Danzo looked between the Hokage and his protege. This had not been a scenario he was ready for yet. Your ward has been trained well, Sarutobi. I'm impressed. Agent Konoha made no reply, the tears still slowly trailing down his mask. You will resign, Danzo as an advisor and as the leader of Root. You will place Konoha as the new director, under my complete authority. Konoha will vet them for their loyalty. He will rekey their seals to remain active under himself. You will assist him in this transition. You may advise him if he approaches you, but you will remain under constant observation. If you violate any of these stipulations, you will be executed immediately for treason. Do you understand? Danzo looked between the two, and to the surprise of Kaharu and Homura, he nodded once. I understand. I do not regret my actions, but I see nothing wrong with grooming my own replacement. If this is what the Hokage demands, then I will honor these conditions. It's clear that you were the best choice for the position. He looked to the boy and nodded. It appears I am under your care, Konoha-san. The boy said nothing. Hiruzen gave a dry chuckle and looked at Danzo. Your orders caused Itachi to go rogue. I don't know when you'll be forgiven for that. Danzo shrugged and stood. I have no interest in forgiveness. I only want the best for the village. Hiruzen turned to the two advisors as Konoha escorted Danzo out of the office. I think it's time the three of us had a talk about exactly where you fall in the hierarchy of the village. A reminder of who you should and should not be keeping secrets from. Sai stood straight up as the rest of the Root assembled in the main hall of Bunker 9. Bunker 9 was created to be an emergency meeting point where village VIPs would be relocated in the event of a successful invasion. It hadn't been used except for 3 times in the past 5 years. He and Shin had just been training, when another agent appeared next to their instructor and their session had abruptly ended. They had quickly made their way to the designated meeting place and saw that the entirety of Root had been summoned. When they had all filed in, Danzo stepped forward out of the shadows. Beside him was a figure that was around Sai's own age in an unusual mask. Sai knew the shinobi to not be part of Root, which made this entire situation unusual in and of itself. The day has come for things to change. Leadership of Root is being transferred to Konoha effective immediately. 7 different Root agents surrounded the two, separating Danzo from the agent Konoha. 6 of them focused on watching the boy as Danzo was checked over for genjutsu or other nonverbal tells of forced coercion. After a few seconds, the agent checking over Danzo stepped back and kneeled in Konoha's direction. Immediately, every root ninja kneeled and lowered their heads in Konoha's direction. Sai didn't know what would happen from this point on, but this was big. Their new leader stood forward, his mask covered in blood and dirt. There were tear tracks down the bottom half of it that mixed the blood and dust together. He looked them over and then nodded. Continue on. Halt all graduation exercises until further notice. I want a list of all current operatives and operations. Dismissed. As they were dismissed, Sai couldn't help but think of how similar their new leader, Konoha, was to Danzo when they both gave orders. There was no protocols established for leadership being transferred to someone other than Danzo. Danzo himself probably hadn't expected this to happen. He was cooperating and that meant he did think it was the best option at this current time. Perhaps everything was okay. You're not okay, Naruto. I think you need to tone down the training. It was only his standing as both the Anbu commander and his position as Naruto's older brother that made the stubborn kid stop his katas and fall to the ground. You might be blessed with ungodly stamina, but even you have limits. This wasn't the first time that he had seen the boy training until his limbs were shaking, but he wasn't happy to see it again. The last time it had happened was when Naruto had gotten in a bad fight with the Kyuubi Kurama about something to do with the blind Uchiha. He was taking the disappearance of Itachi badly. Very badly. He sat down beside the 7-year-old and rested his hand on the boy's head. They sat in silence and just watched the clouds pass them by. I miss him. Kakashi didn't need empathy to hear the sorrow dripping from Naruto's words. I know. We'll find him and then we'll find out why he did what he did. I'm sure he had a reason. Naruto, I want to talk to you about your hands. The boy tensed, but didn't move as Kakashi slowly took his hands and examined them. Naruto had ragged scars down the middle of his palms. Naruto, why are these still visible? Your healing should have taken care of them by now. The boy turned his head and avoided meeting his eyes. I asked to keep them. I wanted to remember that night. I'll heal them when he comes back. Kakashi wanted to tell him that Itachi could never return after what he had done. That hoping for things to return to normal was hopeless. That Itachi's best hope was imprisonment. He knew that Naruto already sensed what he wished to say within him, and that was enough. Naruto curled up into his side and just sobbed a little. I'll let you know if we find anything about him. If we find him, I'll let you talk to him. I won't keep you in the dark about it. He shouldn't let his emotions overwhelm his judgment, but it was worth it for the quiet whispered, "Thank you," that came from the boy's lips. Team RO needs a new captain. Would you know that was his Weasel's position? And I'm not strong enough for missions. I couldn't save the Uchiha. I need to get stronger. I want to learn Jutsu now. Considering that I'm known for copying over 1,000 Jutsu, I'm sure that I have some to teach you that would interest you. I agree. I think it's time to put you back on the path of training. Thank you, Ni-san. When do you think my training can start up again? I'll talk to the Hokage. See if you and Team RO can get a mission as well. What's wrong? I'm being reassigned. Naruto wiped his eyes and sniffled. I'm going to become an Anbu captain. Kakashi narrowed his eye. What? There's no squad that needs a captain besides RO. Cat is taking over RO. I only answer to you and the Hokage. You have no squad. What purpose will you serve? Naruto looked away. I can't really say. Hokage Gigi wants it off the record. I needed higher clearance though, so that's why the rank. It's just a formality. Naruto, I don't like this. Are you sure you're not getting too far in over your head? I have to do this, Ni-san. The boy gave him a tight hug, and he couldn't help but smile softly. Be safe, Naruto-kun. You still have family that loves you here. I know. Waking up in a hospital room is an unpleasant experience. Waking up in a hospital room after having never expected to wake up again is a different experience altogether. Shisui heard the beeping of a machine monitoring his vitals and reflexively tensed. He could tell there was one other person in the room who was moving around a few feet away. Shisui didn't know where he was. All that he knew was that he had to get out. The fire won't burn the trees. The voice spoke from his side and Shisui paused. That was a phrase that had been used in the last Shinobi War. It was used to identify medic nins to their injured or disorientated comrades. He stayed still for a few seconds, almost expecting a kunai to slit his throat, before he felt the telltale sensation of a medical jutsu soothing his chest. Where am I? You're in an underground bunker hidden in the village. We had to keep you in the shadows during your recovery. Me and your savior. Agent Konoha brought you to me as you were on death's door and ordered me to save you. Shisui felt himself relax, somewhat. Whoever these people were, they clearly weren't root. Shisui realized that Agent Konoha was the designation of the Anbu under Itachi's command. Agent Konoha. Isn't he an Anbu? Why aren't I in the hospital? There were worries that with the escalation of the situation that you'd be captured or kidnapped from a hospital room, or worse, incarcerated or killed for involvement of the Uchiha coup. I thought only the Hokage and the advisors. Konoha kept me informed. If anything, the current situation is worse off for you. After the Uchiha massacre, it was rumored in the higher levels that Itachi may have had assistance. Shisui felt the darkness squeezing in on him. He grew unbearably cold, and his voice croaked feebly from his suddenly weak body. Uchiha massacre. So Itachi killed over 90% of the Uchiha clan, yes. And if you were to suddenly appear now, you'd never be let out of the compound again, at best. No, your future lies down another path. What are you talking about? My path. My clan is dead, my best friend is its executioner. I've given everything to the village, what more does it want? There was silence as the medic Nin slowly unraveled a bandage on his arm and applied a new one before he answered. Your life was saved by Konoha. The village may have cast you out, but there is still work to be done. Konoha-sama wants to save Itachi. I have a feeling that you may have similar desire for that. Shisui grit his teeth and growled, I have no eyes, I'm next to useless now. You aren't the first blind shinobi, and you won't be the last. You sacrificed a lot for peace, but you have more to give whether you know it or not. Your family is gone and you can't return to the village, but you still believe in the will of fire, don't you? You have a chance to stand back up. A chance to fight again. Will you take it? We will see. I want to talk to Konoha. The medic laughed. Of course you do. That's to be expected, considering how he saved your life. He's quite eager to meet you, you know. Itachi apparently spoke quite highly of you, and he's somewhat desperate to find someone who also believes that his senpai can be saved. Shisui felt his heart unwittingly go out for the boy. It appears that the Uchiha weren't the only victims of this night. He knew how close Itachi was to his protege, they were practically family. Brothers in all but blood. Shisui felt guilty. Perhaps he could have tried to use his left eye to stop the coup. He had just been so overwhelmed with fear of Danzo that he had given up hope. He had surrendered to fear. He felt ashamed. Laying beaten and broken, in both spirit and mind, Shisui had never felt so hopeless in all his life. I want to fix what I've done. I want to make up for my mistakes. Will he let me do that? All you desire and more, as long as you give him your loyalty. You'll find that it's impossible to lie to him. And if you have any ulterior motives, you'll find that any chance of redemption you might have had will be stripped of you. Shisui nodded and tried to sit up only to groan in pain. He heard the medic laugh again and sit down. Don't be too eager now. Your injuries will need to heal before you are good to do anything. When will I speak to Konoha? He will come check in on your status soon. I'd get some rest while you could. You'll be busy in the weeks to come. Very well, thank you. Itachi looked out towards the village of Konohagakure from the treetops in silent contemplation. He didn't react as the figure of Madara whirled into existence beside him. His ancestor wore a spiral mask and large robe. The glint of red visible from behind the eye hole of the mask ensured he was a true Uchiha. You promised me the eradication of the Uchiha clan, and yet I hear that some of them survived the night. I was stopped by Agent Konoha. My young disciple is quite skilled. Madara laughed, and Itachi wanted to attack him just for how cruel he sounded. He made no move and instead looked towards his current ally. Well, regardless, a deal is a deal, Itachi-san. Are you still hoping to join Akatsuki for protection? Yes. With the village on my tail, I will need it. Very true. Will you be loyal though, I wonder? He said nothing as the deranged man chuckled and started leaping across the treetops. You'll meet your new family in the Omegakure. Be there in 5 days' time. Pain will introduce you to your new partner, Juzo Biwa. Itachi gave one last look off to the village before departing hastily. It wasn't the hunter Nin he worried would catch him, but Naruto. If the boy caught up to him now and begged him to stay, he didn't know if he could refuse. Naruto sat down in the Hokage's office across from the Hokage, Danzo at his side. He had missives that he had received from root operatives. And his own private source. So, Iwagakure is looking to ally with Kiri and Kumo. Danzo nodded. Yes, Sarutobi. Onoki is making it increasingly clear that he is displeased with this treaty you've forced Kumo to take part of. He's made no progress in tempting Kiri to his side. It seems the child Yagura is content to remain neutral while he orchestrates the genocide of his own nation's Kekkei Genkais. But, there has been increased communications between Onoki and A. Well, that surely can't be good. What steps are we taking in his endeavor? He looked to the unmasked Naruto. Root operatives have found that one of Iwa's Jinchurikis has left the village and travels around the land of Earth. Sarutobi frowned. Are you implying an assassination, Naruto-kun? No, Hokage-sama. I wish to try to convince him to defect. Chapter 7. Naruto sat alongside Hiruzen in Training Ground 7. They had come here many times to train. It was the training ground where the Sannin had been instructed as well. Out of the entire village, it truly felt the most like their spot. Naruto knew that if he was upset and needed to talk to someone, if he just waited here, then eventually his Jiji would walk down the street and sit beside him. The Hokage smiled as he caught Naruto's eyes. Are you ready to begin, Naruto-kun? Yes, Jiji. His guardian held out a square of chakra paper which Naruto took reverently. He knew that this was the next milestone in his shinobi career. He channeled chakra into it. There was a moment of silence as teacher and student waited to see the results. The two were surprised when the paper split down the middle loudly and the two halves slowly were soaked. My. Two chakra natures. Wind and water. A perfect combination of your parents, Naruto-kun. Naruto smiled as he looked at the remains of the paper and nodded. Kurama told me that because of what he did, chakra would be easy for me to use in any element, but he said that my affinities would still be the easiest for me to learn. Indeed. Then, that's where we'll start. Well, after I see your progress with the Genin 3. Have you been practicing? Naruto gulped. Well, I'm having problems with the Bunshin. It was not often that Naruto struggled with something and he didn't like admitting that he couldn't do something. He was very thankful for Sarutobi simply raising an eyebrow and saying, show me. Naruto closed his eyes and concentrated. He made the hand seals and channeled the chakra, and 75 half-dead looking clones appeared around them. He blushed as the Hokage gave a loud laugh and ruffled his hair. I think I might know what the problem is, Naruto-kun. You simply have too much chakra, and your control is not Kage level yet. That can be easily remedied. Well, I was planning on teaching you this technique regardless, but I think it's best to do it now before we move on to elemental jutsu. Oh, what technique, sensei? It's called the Kage Bunshin, the shadow clone technique. Naruto watched as a clone appeared beside Hiruzen in a small cloud of smoke. It takes a massive amount of chakra to make even one. Splits it between the user and the clone. The most impressive part of the jutsu is that all the memories the clone experiences are sent back to the caster upon its destruction. Naruto felt his eyes widen at that. The implications were astounding. If he could make 2 clones, then he could have 3 days of studying in one. That would greatly enhance his training. That's amazing. Jiji. Please, how do I do it? What are the seals? The Hokage gave another smile. Naruto knew that at his core, the Sandaime was a teacher. An academic at heart. Naruto didn't mind pleasing him with his enthusiasm for learning. He had an opportunity to learn from the best and he'd always make sure that he didn't squander it. It's rather simple, Naruto-kun. Just a ram seal, like so. Naruto's hand went into the position and he channeled chakra. How many do you think I'll be able to make, Jiji? Probably a couple, Naruto. It's a very taxing. He was interrupted as the clearing was covered in a monumental cloud of smoke. Naruto blinked in confusion as the smoke started to dissipate. Jiji, it didn't make that much smoke when you did it. I think I did something wrong. Naruto turned and realized that his teacher was gaping around them, speechless. He didn't understand until he sensed them. Looking in a mirror for the first time was disconcerting. Seeing your reflection, how the world sees you, is an unusual phenomenon. Sensing the emotions of yourself perfectly copied, and surrounding yourself, emanating from over 300 replicas is staggering. Naruto-kun. We need to have a talk about your future training regimen. I have decided that it may need accelerating. Sai was surprised when he was called in to meet with their new leader, Konoha. Konoha had taken over headquarters with a seamless transition. He had vetted all the agents within 3 days, and had retired 5 of them. Those 5, surprisingly, had not been neutralized but reintegrated within the village as civilians. An interesting change. He walked into the leader's room and saw the true face of Konoha for the first time. The boy seemed to be as old as Sai himself. It was quite surprising. Most children aren't so independent or mature. Unless they were en route. Sai stepped forward and saluted. At ease. What's your name? I am called Sai. Konoha nodded and looked at him with an interested gaze. I have a long-term mission for you. I want you to join the Shinobi Academy and observe the clan heirs, mainly one Sasuke Uchiha. Sai bowed his head when he received his orders and kneeled. Your will be done, Leader Sama. Sai stood up and walked out. He had to find out how to make friends with kids. He didn't want to disappoint his leader. Danzo or not, it wouldn't reflect well for a root agent to fail their mission. He made his way to the mess hall and found his brother eating with gusto. Shin had always been more expressive than Sai had been. His brother looked up mid-bite and had the decency to swallow before he started speaking. Hey, so what was the meeting about? I've been assigned a new long-term mission. I'm going to join the Shinobi Academy and observe the clan heirs. I will be stuck with children. Might be good for you, Sai. You are a kid. He glared at his brother and didn't realize that he didn't flinch from the show of emotion. Emotional conditioning had been expunged from their training. He saw his brother smiling at him though, and he realized he was still expressing his displeasure. His face seamlessly slid back into the neutral state he had been trained to assume, and then his brother chose to frown. Naruto watched the young ninja leave his new office and sighed. The office was rather bare, no surprise. But he had taken a few photos that the Sandame had gifted him and put them on his desk. The photo of him and Itachi eating at Ichiraku was nestled safely in his top drawer. It wouldn't do to openly cherish an S-rank missing nin. It also still upset him to look at. Naruto stood up and opened a secret door behind his chair. Danzo had turned his paranoia into a weapon, and had dozens of secret passages that only he had previously known about. It had been quite easy for Naruto to discern of their existence. One-on-one time with anyone would inevitably reveal their darkest secrets. He slowly traveled down the spiraling staircase and past a few locked doors. He was headed towards one of his own darkest secrets at the moment. He went up to the door and channeled his chakra into the handle to release the locking seal. It glowed green and he pushed it open as the lock lightly clicked. Naruto was convinced there was something genetic about Uzumaki's and seals. Kurama couldn't highlight any one genome that indicated such relationship, but Naruto only needed to think of the few dozen seals he had mastered to be confident in his belief. The art of sealing was done in levels, or stages, and on top of that there were levels for each individual seal. Seal masters made the most of their money off of fine-tuning existing seals, making them more dependable, efficient, and lethal. It was very rare for entirely new seals to come out in mass production. Usually, it would take a few generations of a prototype seal to be perfected by the creator or their students before it would start to be utilized by the village and from there stolen by spies and off of fallen shinobi. Naruto didn't have time for such traditions. He had designed his own locking seal which was keyed to chakra signatures and used them everywhere he didn't anyone snooping. He was sure that Danzo knew he had his own locks now, but he would most likely keep it to himself. Just because he didn't lead route anymore didn't mean that he wasn't still a strong player in the game of the village political theater. Ever since his retirement, Danzo had been much more active talking to the different clans. It would take time to find out what he was up to, but Naruto was determined to not be outplayed by the wily warmonger. He opened the door and stepped into Kabuto's newest laboratory. Kabuto didn't look up from his test tubes. Naruto didn't expect him to. The experiments Danzo had been conducting were disgusting, but fascinated Naruto's friend all the same. The young doctor hadn't left the chamber for more than an hour or so a day. I can't say that I'm glad to be back in the midst of route, but this is simply too good to let go to waste. He has been. I know, Kabuto-kun. Naruto walked over and sat up on the desk. I read all the research before handing it off to you. I didn't understand most of it, and what I didn't like. I don't know if it's a good idea to continue these experiments. Naruto could sense Kabuto's reluctance to agree. Kabuto was of a more morally ambiguous nature. He also sensed his apprehension to raise his concerns. You can disagree, Kabuto-kun. I won't get mad. Kabuto smiled and turned to face him. Naruto-kun. Your enemies won't play nice, we shouldn't either. These experiments aren't pleasant, but there's ways to go about conducting them in a much more humane and compassionate manner. They could mean success. You need to utilize every tool in your arsenal if you want the best chance to succeed. Quote. I know you're right, I just don't really like it. I'll trust in your judgment for now though. Thank you for coming here. I know you're worried Danzo might strike at us. You're very brave. Kabuto laughed and Naruto pouted, but he knew that there wasn't anything he could do to stop it. Kabuto would still get amused if Naruto ever tried to console him or anything of the like. What's our next move, Naruto-kun? We have route at our command. Suddenly, many more routes are open to us. Don't get too excited, I don't trust anyone here. Or Danzo. If anyone could find a way to fool my empathy, it'd be him. I have agents gathering as much information on the Jinchuriki as they can get, and I convinced the Sandaime to let me send agents out to convince Roshi, the Jinchuriki of the Four Tails, to defect. But what? Well, I didn't tell him that I'm going out to talk to Roshi myself. Kabuto paused in his writing and turned back to Naruto, face grave. That's a terrible idea if anything happened to you. I know, but I have to. He wouldn't trust anyone else. This is something I have to do myself. Kabuto frowned, and Naruto winced as he became angry. Kabuto's anger was like a snake coiled tight and venomous. Kabuto was a dangerous man, and he was almost as emotional as an Uchiha. It just took more than most to get him to lose his cool. Who are you taking with you? Root agents. Yes, but I'm not going as Konoha. Kabuto blinked and his surprise dulled his anger somewhat. Naruto sighed a little bit. He hated upsetting those he was close to. You're going as Naruto Uzumaki. How's that going to work? Naruto winced and looked away as he idly traced a seal on the inside of his sleeve. Well, they're holding the Jonin exams tomorrow, and I'm going to sneak in and ace them. Then they'll have to make me a Jonin. Kabuto groaned and Naruto winced again. The only thing worse than Kabuto's anger was his anxiety, and it was spiking heavily right now. You haven't given me a lot of time, Naruto-kun. Make some shadow clones. We're going to get a few hours of cramming in before you throw yourself into something you are completely unprepared for. Shikaku Nara watched as the nominees for the Jonin exam filed in one by one. The Jonin exam was an option for promotion for Chunin or Tokobutsu Junin who felt they were ready for the advancement but had not been promoted on their Hokage's own initiative. It was mainly for the use of those who needed to prove themselves capable. As it was the Jonin exam, it was much more secretive than the ostentatious and public Chunin exams. As such, it also had an incredibly smaller pool of examinees. There was only around a dozen applicants, but the nature of the exam split them up into cells of 4. The group he was supervising contained Chunin's Anko Midarashi, Kurenai Yuhi, Saito Ikub, and Tokobutsu Junin Hayate Gecko. The Jonin exams only happened once every 2 years, and for good reason. They were incredibly grueling, and if they were offered every 6 months they could be more harmful than beneficial for the village's strength. It followed the same formula for the Chunin exams, but were much less forgiving. There was a 300-question exam for the first part of the Jonin exam. Each examinee was given a specialized packet the day before the exam that had 70 questions of the 300. Each examinee was given different questions. In the time before the exam they were expected to figure out the answers they had been provided, and they would have to use their skills to gather the other answers. Of course, this left 20 questions that no examinee had been provided, and to pass the exam you could only miss 10 questions. The first exam only lasted an hour. Shikaku thought this was the easiest test of them all, but many Junin blamed this part of the exam for why it took them so long to be promoted. This year's batch of students wordlessly filed in and sat down at their desks. He sat up and got ready to observe them more closely. Begin. Each test taker silently began their exam. This wasn't the first time Hayate had taken the Jonin exam. 2 years ago he had been advanced to Tokobutsu Junin because of how well he done. His swordmanship and stealth had been exemplary, but his genjutsu and ninjutsu had been rather lacking. He was also fighting a chronic illness which had been progressively getting worse. Not the best material for Jonin, but his will and ambition were slowly making up for that. Anko Mitarashi and Kurenai Yuhi were two young chunin with something to prove. Most of the village knew of Anko Mitarashi, even he found it hard to believe that she hadn't known of her sensei, Orochimaru's, true nature. But, she fueled her resentment and anger into sarcasm, disrespect, and a drive to make anyone who doubted her eat crow. Literally, in the case of one very vocal and drunk civilian. Anko was dead set on climbing the ranks as fast as she could. Alongside her was Kurenai. Kurenai was an esteemed genjutsu user who had been quickly garnering fame throughout the village for her skill with the art. With the loss of the majority of the Uchiha, the village had been pushing for genjutsu users to climb the ranks to teach the next generation. That was enough, in conjunction to being one of Anko's only friends, to get her to take the exam. Lastly, there was Saito Ikub. A chunin going on 6 years, it was quite surprising to see him pushed to be advanced this late into his chunin career. He had been an academy instructor and had seemed content to remain there, but had turned in his application on time and so went in. Shikaku doubted that anyone from this group would pass the entire exam. They were all quite skilled, most of them just lacked some needed experience that they had yet to gain. But, they would get a taste of what being a Jonin meant, and that would hopefully inspire them to proceed. They were about 15 minutes into the exam when Shikaku noticed something off. Saito was acting unusual. Each shinobi had a dossier, a file that included previous exams, mission statistics, confirmed kills, personal history, and behavioral missives. Saito wasn't behaving as his dossier had led Shikaku to expect him to. It was possible that the dossier didn't know all of a shinobi's secrets, but the behavioral section shouldn't be this off. Saito was noted to be an academic, but he was also supposed to be anxious. He nearly failed his first chunin exam due to his nerves. Yet, out of the 4 of them, Saito was the most cool-headed, and was flying through the exam. That could almost be dismissed by assuming he had just studied his questions well in other general areas. Except, he was only looking down at his paper and was not cheating. The other 3 were being smart, but Shikaku could more or less determine how they were getting by. It was likely that Yuhi and Mitarashi had previously exchanged answers with each other. Hayate was taking notes of what the other 2 were writing in his margins, and Anko had sent out a snake prior to the start of the exam, it seemed, and it was coiled around a rafter above Saito and Hayate. While all of this was going on, Saito was sitting down, writing. His eyes didn't stray from his page, and he was nearly done with his test. After another 5 minutes, Saito stopped writing and put his pencil down. The other 3 examinees paused and looked up as he turned his papers over and sat up straight in his seat. Shikaku didn't blame them, but still made note of it all the same. It seemed that Saito's belief in his answers unsettled them. If not that, then they hadn't been as quick to secure Saito's answers as they had hoped to have been. There was still 40 minutes left after all. This would be a good lesson for them though. If they failed because they had made an assumption about the performance of one of their opponents, then that would be as good a metaphor as any for underestimating an opponent out in the field. Whatever chance they had before, it was severely diminished now. It was imperative to get all 70 questions that the other test takers had, and gamble on the 20 that no one knew. Even if they got half of Saito's answers, that left 55 answers which remained. Terrible odds for this level of examination. The questions weren't easy, Shikaku had seen to that. Saito was sitting still, calmly facing forwards. Shikaku didn't know how, but this wasn't Saito. Of course, he didn't make any outward sign so as to alert the other 3. If a shinobi snuck into the Jonin exams, then they had the skill to take them. There wasn't any rule outlawing new chunin or even genin, honestly, from taking part of the exam. It was just highly dangerous. Whoever this shinobi was, though, they were doing quite well for themselves. That being said, how well they did truly depended on the results of their exam. Regardless, it would be interesting to watch this play out. Time passed by incredibly slowly for the 2 kunoichi as Hayate finished his exam with 15 minutes to spare. Mitarashi barely had enough time to set down her pencil before the timer rang. Time's up. Report to the Hokage Tower for the second part of the exam. The 4 of them stood up and headed out. He waited until the door closed before he walked over and grabbed Saito's exam. He scanned it and chuckled. Perfect score. Whoever this shinobi was, he was good. Shikaku got up and headed over to the Hokage tower. Usually, he'd head home after his job was done, but this was proving to be interesting for once. Anko walked alongside Kurenai and behind Saito and Hayate. The test had not gone as she or Kurenai had planned and she was upset. She remembered Saito. He'd been something of a bully when she had first joined the academy. He had been jealous that Orochimaru had chosen her as his apprentice. Of course, after her sensei's defection, then Saito had smugly ridiculed her and questioned her own loyalty. She had told herself that it was just because he was an inferior shinobi and wouldn't amount to anything higher than an academy instructor. That's what helped her get over his harassment and rumors that he spread about her. His inferiority. So him coming in and fucking not just her, but Kurenai and Hayate over in that exam, well, it really pissed her off. There was no way that Saito of all people could have finished the exam that quickly and passed, so he was just trying to sabotage her. Fuck her over once again. You need to calm down, Anko. She grunted and rolled her eyes at Kurenai. Prim, composed, Ice Queen Kurenai. Her best friend. You know, he didn't just fuck me back there, you got the short end of the stick in there too. He reamed us in there. It doesn't matter how well we do now, there's no way that I got enough of the questions to pass. Then that reflects poorly on us as Jonin hopefuls. Don't give me that we would have been fine if he hadn't. It's not just his fault, Anko. We should have done better to get his answers while he was vulnerable, and we failed to do so. Anko ground her teeth and looked away. She hated it whenever Kurenai was right, which she often was. I'm gonna go give him a piece of my mind. Kurenai sighed, but she sped up before he friend could try to stop her. She quickly passed Hayate, who gave her an amused smirk, and she caught up to Saito, who was emotionlessly walking along the road. Hey Saito. What the fuck was that back there? Saito looked at her and it was almost as if he didn't know who she was. The prick was pretending as if they hadn't ever met or something. I apologize, Mitarashi-san. I didn't realize that finishing so quickly would impede your test. Bullshit, Saito. And really, Mitarashi-san. You think being civil is going to work now, after you've called me, snake slut, all these years? No. But, I mean, we are both shinobi of Konoha, right? Maybe we could, start over. On a new leaf. Anko would have laughed at his balsiness if she wasn't so upset. Fuck you, Ikub. Why the fuck do you think I'd just start over after all the shit you've pulled? Saito actually seemed to grimace, or was that a gag, before he nodded. Of all things, I apologize for my behavior, Mitarashi-san. I didn't treat you as a fellow shinobi, and that is disgraceful on my end. I promise to try better to be open-minded in the future. After this exam, I will do my best to stay out of your way, as best I can, and not cause you any more trouble. Anko couldn't process what Saito was saying. She had known him for years, and this was a complete reversal of what she had been expecting. She didn't know how to respond outright, so she settled for glaring and poking him harshly. If this is another fucking joke, Ikub, then I'm going to beat you so hard it'll make the last one look like a training session. She didn't wait for a response, she turned and walked back to Kurenai agitatedly. What happened? He apologized. Kurenai blinked in shock, and Anko was relieved she wasn't the only one who hadn't been expecting that from Saito. The instructor may have been a decent teacher, but he wasn't a very good person. He had nearly been arrested by the Uchiha for attempting to start a riot before the Uchiha massacre had happened. He didn't have many friends. Maybe he's trying to make a new start with this exam, Anko. I don't think that's Saito Ikub. He called me, Mitarashi-san. Something's going on here, and I intend to find out what. Anko kept her eyes on Saito as they neared the Hokage tower. Whatever was going on, she wasn't gonna let Saito get one over on her. She'd be ready for whatever trick he pulled. The Hokage tower was one of the most defended buildings within the village for a number of reasons. Besides being the symbolic source of strength for the village, it also housed the majority of sensitive documents, forbidden jutsu, and shinobi rosters. It also was the office of the Hokage themselves. On top of all that, there were cells in the sublevels of the tower that could house prisoners of interest to the village. Today, they house over a dozen captured spies. Most of which belong to Orochimaru, truth be told. They had already gone through T&I, and now they were to be the Junin hopefuls' second test. The hopefuls would have an hour to break the prisoners and find out what information the spies had already provided to the village. The toughest shinobi had been selected from the halls of T&I, the ones that would see assisting a lowly ranked shinobi of the leaf as an insult, ones that would actually make for a good test. The examinees had an hour, and if they did not succeed, they would fail. Of course, they would continue on to the next exam, but they would find out afterwards if they passed or failed. To become Junin, they had to pass all three by a respectable margin. Scraping by in 2 exams wouldn't be good enough. Sarutobi had come to watch the Junin exam play out. He watched as the examinees all filed in and settled down from his observation window. They would be kept under observation and they'd be released one at a time to break their prisoners. Hiruzen was pulled from his observation as Shikaku Nara stepped beside him. Hokage-sama, I have something to report. Oh. Go ahead, Nara-san. Shikaku bowed his head slightly and held out a folder, the results of the first exam. As he took them, he couldn't help but note the interest in the Nara's eyes. That meant that this mystery was important. He looked over the results and raised an eyebrow. Out of the 3 groups, there were 3 perfect scores. It seems our Chunin are more skilled than we thought. These 3 candidates all achieved perfect scores, in an almost identical fashion. Most unusual. What do you suspect? He watched as the veteran Junin sighed and glanced back at the report. I suspect a covert operative who hasn't been granted an official Junin rank wants to claim what they believe they deserve. It wasn't an unheard of situation in the history of the village. Similar scenarios had happened. There were nearly a dozen cases of that exact phenomenon. This time though, it put Hiruzen on edge. He immediately thought of someone he hoped his ward wasn't planning anything that he hadn't discussed with his guardian. The boy was already in deeper in the life of a shinobi than he had wanted for his age. But he would respect the boy's decisions. If this was Naruto, then he would give him an impartial and objective evaluation of his exams. He only hoped that the boy would be able to handle the responsibility that he was putting on his shoulders. His stomach sank even deeper when Ibiki entered the room with a scowl on his face. Hokage-sama, this Saito Ikabe has to be in disguise. What happened? He walked into the room, asked his target a single question which wasn't even answered, and left. Upon debrief, he supplied the requested information. I think that this Saito stole the information beforehand, or... Yes, Ibiki. The veteran interrogator coughed lightly into his hand and looked back towards his cage. Or it's the shinobi you have randomly testing the Yamanaka. Shikaku looked up sharply at that, observing the Sandame intently. Even he didn't know much about Agent Konoha. Shikaku had 3 possible candidates for the identity of the terrifying censor and was interested to find out the true identity of such a shinobi. Hiruzen couldn't restrain the sigh that left his lips. My thoughts exactly. Ibiki, I wonder how the rest of the examinees will fare. The final part of the Junin exam was scheduled to take place in one of the Junin training grounds. These were much harder to find and access than normal training grounds, and minimized any lost civilian or hapless genin from stumbling into an active sparring ground. Anko furiously marched alongside Kurenai to Training Ground 22, a large valley on the northern outskirts of the village territory. Ahead of them, yet again, was Saito Ikabe. Thanks to her training under Orochimaru as well as her own natural inclinations, Anko had been banking on having the best performance in the interrogation exam. She knew Kurenai was damned good as well, what with her twisting genjutsu, but Anko's style took less time and less effort. A little more messy, but extremely efficient. So, Anko took it a little personal when she came out and saw that 3 others had completed their interrogations before her, one of them being Ikabe. He even had the nerve to nod at her when she arrived, as if they were actually starting over. She nearly tripped as Kurenai nudged her. Her friend almost glared at her and Anko rolled her eyes with a huff. She did her best to calm down and relax. She begun running a mental checklist of all her stashed seals and weapons. They all knew what the 3rd exam would be. An all-out slugfest. It was unspoken between the cells that they'd group up in their teams of 4 against the other 2. But, Anko was looking forward to getting 1 or 2 licks in on Ikabe in the madness. She saw him tense a bit and glance back at her subconsciously. He looked away as soon as he realized they had made eye contact, and Anko's stomach dropped. She knew that Saito Ikabe wasn't a censor type. Those who were gifted with the ability to sense chakra in their surroundings were the most adept at sensing killing intent. Thinking of how many ways she could stab him non-lethally wasn't necessarily killing intent, but it still carried over. A sensor type could distinguish passing urges from premeditated fantasies of maiming. Whoever was walking in front of them wasn't the teacher who couldn't sense her if she was 6 inches behind him. Not only that, but she had now just alienated whoever had been able to remain disguised as another shinobi through their entire exam. The imposter knew that Anko had intended to ambush him and shinobi were a paranoid bunch. She wouldn't be able to convince them that her intentions had changed. With a silent snarl she started signaling Kurenai that their original plans would have to change. Unfortunately, they'd have to leave Hayate to defend himself, as the Saito imposter would assume that all 3 of them were on board for taking him out. She tried to ignore Kurenai's furious glare as they rapidly traded signed messages. Whoever this infiltrator was, Anko was going to have some harsh words with them about how royally they had managed to fuck up her Jonin exam. They would definitely be buying her some dango at the least. Naruto quickly surveyed the battlefield they had been led to. Training Ground 22 was one of the 5 locations Kabuto had predicted would be used, based upon the information that a handful of root agents had supplied to Naruto. It was one of the smaller training grounds and would force the examinees to remain enclosed during their combat. He twitched as the aggression surrounding him strengthened. The negative emotions these shinobi were allowing to overwhelm them was almost staggering. It was taking all of his training up to this point to not visibly react to each and every violent thought. Kurama was proud of him, he believed, but was remaining quiet so as to not distract him. His senses were going haywire, but that was good. It was giving him time to get accustomed to them, because when the fighting began, it would only get worse. They were all lined up and Kakashi appeared before them all. They all stood tighter at attention. Kakashi had only gained more of a mythical status after he disappeared from the public eye. Naruto felt Kakashi's eye wash over him and he nearly gulped. He knew both he and Gigi knew that he was in the exam. He gritted his teeth and held his head Saito's head high. He would do them proud. He would show that he couldn't be anything else but a Jonin. He could help the village. He would help the village. Examinees, you all have an hour to express your combat expertise. Here are the rules. No killing. No forbidden jutsu. No leaving the arena. The wind whistled through the valley as everyone took a steadying breath. Begin. The battle raged. In the span of a second, the groups had already split off 3 groups all facing each other. Of course, that lasted for only a moment before everything changed. Anko and Kurenai jumped away from Hayate and Naruto making 4 groups. That's when Naruto took that time of surprise from the other 2 groups and Hayate to release his other 2 shadow clones in the other 2 groups and replaced himself with a nearby rock as a volley of shuriken pierced where his body had been a breath before. Things went from aggressive to vicious. Most of it could be laid at Naruto's feet, but the 2 kunoichi had not helped. Tensions rose as the other 2 groups realized their cells of 4 had fallen down to cells of 3, and the kunoichi's retreat incriminated them as also being involved. If the 3 absentee shinobi reappeared together with the kunoichi, that would make a cell of 5 hopefuls against 2 cells of 3 and a solitary Hayate. 1 cell went after Anko and Kurenai while the other surged towards Hayate. It was smart to take out the visible threats and keep eyes open for ambushes or traps. Naruto normally would have capitalized on their paranoia and remained in hiding until the other 2 cells weakened each other up before storming in. Normally. But he wanted to leave his footprint. He wanted to be noticed. He wanted to be remembered. He had to avoid rolling his eyes as Kurama snickered in the back of his mind. Naruto dropped his henge and put his hands together, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 20 clones spawned at his sides and leapt forwards silently. They dashed forwards to engage in the members of the 2 cells that were hanging back watching for ambushes. Ironically, they were the easiest targets. Naruto closed his eyes and relaxed for a second as the shadow clones created an empathy relay. It was a side effect of the jutsu that had never been observable before. Each clone had their empathy. The more clones he had out at a time, the faster his empathy was processed and turned into reflexes. The first time he had used the jutsu it had left him a massive headache, but with training that had minimized. His clones fell onto the 11 shinobi with efficiency that he had learned from his days in Anbu. Each cell had to contend with a new 5-man cell. He sensed their confusion as a flood of children swarmed the battlefield and sensed it turn into panic as his clones incapacitated two ninja right off the bat, one being an Aburame and the other being a Nara. There had only been a few shinobi that had caught on to him and his clones, and those two had been the most dangerous to him. If the Nara had been just a bit quicker, she could have possibly gotten the rest of the examinees to team up on the fakes. As it was, his clones were slowly being pushed to the defensive as the three two-man cells and Hayate started to thin the herd. Shadow clones were meant for reconnaissance, one good hit was all it took to take them out. Blades flew through the air, and blood was spilled as the groups were all shepherded together. His clones worked seamlessly together, and they started to react before their enemies could even physically react. He watched impassively as one hapless Chunin was beaten down by 5 clones who had managed to isolate him, before moving on after 2 clones axe-kicked his knees and shattered them. His screams were silenced by a dispassionate kick to the head. These were allies after all. Rather brutal. Naruto-kun. Are you sure that this is the path you want to walk? Look at all the pain you cause those who you are supposed to protect. I have to play by the rules of this world if I want to change it. It doesn't justify my actions, Kurama-kun, but I have to do what I can. This is what I was trained to do and it will let me help the Biju the quickest. I never intended to dominate your life with this purpose you zealously fight for. I only wanted to show you the truth of this life. To know the truth and not act on it is how evil infects the air. To breathe in that apathy I can sense the hatred that resides within us all. I know how cruel inaction truly is. This is my choice, Kurama. Millions have ignored your pain, the pain of you and your siblings. If I am to be the one soul that will make a difference, I have to act with every ounce of my being. You are my family. This is what family does for each other, what you have already done for me. Behind you. Naruto shoved his head to the side, dodging the kunai that would have taken a good chunk of his ear and dropped from the tree branch he had been hiding in. Across from him stood Hayate with Anko and Kurenai on either side. A kid. What the fuck are they thinking? Not now. Anko. Don't underestimate. Naruto leapt forward and once more capitalized on someone underestimating him. Hayate went for a swipe and Naruto seamlessly flowed under his blade. As if he was an amateur, Hayate lost his grip on his sword as Naruto chopped his wrists, and broke his grip. He immediately twisted and kicked the sword, the chakra-infused strike sending it far out of bounds. Anko immediately pulled Hayate back and the three of them got into taijutsu positions. Naruto identified them as the snake style, the willow stance, and the village style, Jonin stance. He took his position and heard them gasp as the Uchiha interceptor stance breathed fear and disbelief into them. His blue eyes gazed coolly at them, taunting them with his lack of dojutsu. Every foolish Chunin hoping to get a promotion tried to learn the interceptor taijutsu and use it to bank on its infamy. When the clan was still going strong, Uchiha Junins would actually teach the stance to any Chunin or Jonin foolish enough to ask. The Uchiha would then laugh if anyone ever tried to use it in combat. Especially, if it was an ace for an examination. You could not use the stance without the Sharingan. Naruto and Itachi had discovered that you could actually use the interceptor without the Sharingan, you just needed some other form of prediction to replace it. Hayate grew a smug smirk and dashed forwards, Anko close behind. Those two didn't have the hesitation that Kurenai felt. It was their first mistake. Hayate's willow stance was about flexibility much like Anko's snake style, and the interceptor answered them with rough grapples and shoves that threw off their balance, quick and debilitating strikes hammering in when they couldn't react. Kurenai came into the fray in an effort to defend her allies. Naruto could easily predict her attacks from her movements alone. Taijutsu was definitely not her strong suit. He blinked as Kurama broke a genjutsu and realized he had almost opened himself up for a finishing strike from Anko. The up-and-coming genjutsu mistress of Konoha was deadly. That level of illusion neared the level of Itachi himself. Anko yelped as Naruto deflected her strike and quickly snapped her wrist. He leapt straight up and into the tree branches as Hayate attempted to blind swipe him. He broke my fucking wrist. I'm gonna kill him. Anko. No. Mitarashi's anger and frustration that had been bubbling this whole time overcame her better senses and forced her to leap up immediately after him. She came face to face with 3 clones who rushed her as soon as she came in range. She dodged and swiped, destroying one. The second backed up a bit as the third managed to latch onto her waist. Instead of trying to regain its footing, the clone pushed against the branch and sailed them into the air and over the cliff. She howled as the third clone descended on them with a brutal donkey kick that bent her in half and sent them flying into the stones below. Naruto watched anxiously as Hayate regrouped with Kurenai. The genjutsu specialist could be a thorn in his side. She was the most likely to get him eliminated out of the rest of the Jonin. It seemed that she didn't like how he'd treated her friend and was getting angry. She was terrifying. No wonder Asuma was so smitten with her. That being said, his clones were starting to thin out a bit. That wouldn't do. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The two Jonin cursed and leapt back as 50 clones suddenly appeared and swarmed the battlefield, the original somewhere amongst them. Who the fuck even is this kid? Kurenai huffed at Hayate's exasperation. He's the Hokage's ward, the Uzumaki. How do you know that? Kurenai opened her mouth to respond and then closed it, trying not to blush. She wasn't quite yet comfortable with how close she had become with Asuma, her teammate turned friend. Well. Her focus jerked back to the present as Hayate shoved her back, out of the way of a kunai that would have severed her hand from her wrist. She was weaving back, constantly on the defensive. Naruto was pressing the offensive with a ruthless zeal. She had sparred with Asuma long enough to spy the telltale signs of wind chakra. The boy wasn't extending it as far as Asuma's trench knives, but his kunai might not have been made of the proper metal. It was still lethal and couldn't be blocked directly. That's what was important. She had spied how his clones had cut down the competition in the other cells. At the end of this exam, there would be a lot of injured shinobi. A few of the others were still up and fighting a final group of 3 ninja against a horde of 30 clones. It was absurd. She knew the B-ranked clone ninjutsu. She could make a single clone. She had believed it to be incredibly powerful and one of her most unexpected assets. In truth, she had planned to showcase it in these exams, weaving a combination of genjutsus at the same time. Therefore, she was incredibly intimidated by just how many clones the child in front of her was spawning. They were strong. Naruto was a small army on his own. She jumped over a clone and kicked him into another doppelganger. Suddenly, she was knocked off her feet. A body crashed into her and she almost put a kunai into it, before she realized that it was Hayate's bleeding body. She could feel the clones taking position around her and readied her kunai. She was about to leap to engage them when a massive cloud of smoke erupted from beneath the nearby cliff. A bruised and bleeding Anko appeared, standing atop the head of a massive green snake. She watched as the clones seemed to respond as one. With a start, she realized that somehow whatever one observed the others would as well. Her heart dropped. Anko. Dispel as many clones as you can. She tried to cut her way through the clones towards Anko. She cut 2 down before a third grabbed her. She swung her knife into its arm and was surprised when blood flew from the wound. Naruto, the real one, wasted no time and disarmed her and swung his own kunai at her chest. She replaced herself at the last second with her dropped weapon, another feat she had anticipated showcasing to the examinees. She lunged and disarmed Naruto, as well as all the seals he had in his pouch. She saw him frown as she stashed the stack of seals away. Sorry, Naruto-kun, Asuma may have told me that you've taken after his father in many ways, such as stashing away an arsenal of weapons. Your skills have been impressive, but you must be tired now. Submit. Anko's foul cursing in the background gave Kurenai little hope that her summon had been able to take out the 30-odd clones at once. It seems they were the last 3 ninja standing. The 2 underdogs and the child that was in no way intended to enter the exam. Whether she succeeded or failed, she was sure that the story of this test was going to make its rounds through the village. Asuma always spoke highly of you, Kurenai-san. I think he has feelings for you. The young boy looked her in the eye with a focus that teetered on the unsettling. You should tell him your fears about pursuing a relationship at this stage in your career, and your unresolved feelings for Mitarashi-san. Kurenai's eyes widened in shock at the secrets she had never voiced aloud, only to see Naruto's hands glow with a sickly green chakra and dash towards her. He engaged in taijutsu and she tried to avoid his fists as well as she could, but inevitably one made contact. She felt a piercing pain in her leg as it collapsed beneath her. The strike left no blemish or tear, but all the same she felt her muscles become unresponsive. Chakura no Mesu. Chakra scalpels. I don't have the control yet to use them for their intended purpose, but with them I am never unarmed. After this, I'll alert the medic nins to you first. This shouldn't take too much longer. 3 more strikes followed, and Kurenai couldn't get away, her limbs lying useless on the ground. She had never felt so powerless. All at the hands of a boy not even 10. I'm sorry to have scared you so, Kurenai-san. I promise I won't tell anyone your secrets. You were too scary. Your genjutsu skills are amazing. Itachi-kun would have been impressed. She couldn't help but stare as the boy turned and put his hands together, only one opponent yet standing. She realized that she had, against her own warnings to her teammates earlier, underestimated his abilities at every turn. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. And as 200 more clones appeared around the giant snake summon, Kurenai realized that she hadn't stopped underestimating him. Chapter 8. A breeze blew idly by as Naruto gazed upon the snake summon underneath Anko's feet. He regretted not focusing more clones on her from the beginning. She was reckless, powerful, and cunning. She was a student of a Sannin. Naruto had many discussions about the Sannin with the Sandaime. Their strengths and weaknesses. Kabuto was especially wary of Orochimaru. Tsunade was a Senju. Jiraiya was his father's sensei. Anko would have learned straight from the mouth of one of the best. He could feel her anger like a bonfire. He had enraged her. That was almost as bad as it was good. The summon lunged forward and took out 20 clones at once. The remaining army wasted no time and dashed towards the towering serpent. The clones grouped up into squads and acted as one. They divvied up into long range, mid range, close range, and sensor squads. He would have to thank Anko for such a challenge and the Sandaime for preparing him for it. The Sannin were known as such for one single feat, fighting Hanzo the Salamander to a standstill. Through their teamwork and their summons, Hiruzen had admitted without their summons that his students would have fallen like so many others before the might of the Salamander. Their use of summons were so integral to their styles that they were their monikers: the Toad Sannin, the Slug Sannin, and the Snake Sannin. Summons were game changers and summoners were fiercely guarded resources of their villages. Naruto had been taught how to deal with them. In fact, he had taught himself. The best way to fight a summon was to banish it back from whence it came. The snake was an armored behemoth, but Anko was not. Naruto sacrificed dozens of clones just to get a single squad on the snake's back. Anko wasted no time in engaging them. She fluidly dodged their chakra scalpels with terrifying speed. Whenever she moved forwards to engage, a hail of kunai and shuriken would intercept her. He had to keep her on her toes and keep her from syncing up with her summon. Break their rhythm and break their synergy. The snake raged beneath her. Whole squads falling to its lunges. Anko held off the clones only to hear the crinkling of paper as she stepped back. Her eyes widened as she saw the edge of a seal and her heart froze as the esoteric markings flashed and ran up her leg. With an explosion of smoke, her summon disappeared from beneath her. Naruto watched as the Chunin glared at the 120 clones surrounding her. Her breathing was ragged and her anger slowly grew past normal aggression. Hatred was overcoming her. She was consumed with it. Naruto gagged from how strong it was. Surrender, Anko-san, or else. I will not be branded. Take it off. Naruto was paralyzed as he watched Anko charge the nearest clone. Her hatred peaked and then she yelled in agony and collapsed to the ground, clawing at her neck. Her screams resembled some buried memory or long-forgotten dream, and Naruto felt a great sadness emanate from Kurama. As she started to sob and writhe, he broke from his trance and rushed to her side. He was there in a moment and his clones quickly joined him. He removed the summon disruption seal. When she didn't calm down and continued to scream in pain, Naruto closed his eyes and allowed his enhanced senses to envelop Anko. He could sense every darkness within her. He understood her and knew her on such a profound level it felt wrong too easy. All her little pet peeves, all her bitterness and regret, shame, fear, hatred. He eventually located the source of the trauma. He pulled her jacket down from her shoulder and saw the pulsing, shifting seal on her neck. Her emotions were a hurricane of blind hatred and rage, but through the tempest he was able to discern its origin. Orochimaru. A cursed seal then. Kabuto had taught him about them. Naruto had known that she had one, but he hadn't thought it would be so reactive. Anko was violently struggling on the ground, her blood smearing in the dirt. His clones tried to hold her steady. He unsealed his brush and ink and tried to clear his mind. He had never used his empathy so closely on someone in so much pain before, and it was hard to remain calm. He dipped his brush and moved to begin. Then he hesitated. The exam is still happening. I am supposed to act as a Jonin. She isn't a kunoichi of the leaf right now. She is my enemy. If I help her, will that affect? Naruto-kun. Listen to me now. Naruto's hand stilled as the words of his best friend spoke with such passion from within him. I have no love for most of the human race. The hatred I bear for them will last for centuries to come, but, look at her, child. She is truly suffering. You can stop it. You can ease her pain. Be a force of compassion, as my father wished for me and my siblings to be. Don't weigh what you gain from inaction against what's right. Yes. Thank you. Mind at ease, Naruto quickly began writing the seals that he had offhandedly discussed with Kabuto. In all of their conversations and plans, removing this seal hadn't been a priority, but as he worked on undoing it, he realized that it should have. Orochimaru's sins weren't his to pay for, nor were they even Kabuto's to repent for. But, it was evil left alone in this world, and Naruto was fairly certain that he was the only one in the village who would have been able to fix it. Because of that, Anko suffered, and that was on him. He'd start off with amplifying the strength of the original containment seal. He had to adjust for her spasms as his clones held her down. She had just lost her senses to the pain and had been reduced to shuddering on the ground. He activated the additional containment and she gasped loudly and her body came to a rest. She softly sobbed before her breathing evened out as she lost consciousness. He relaxed and his clones moved her to a more comfortable position and he rested her head in his lap to better work on the seal. Naruto would have considered stopping it there, but the words of Kurama and his own guilt had made that impossible. He was removing this cursed seal, no matter the cost. He started to create the required sealing matrix when he realized the Sandaime, Kakashi, and a few others were suddenly behind him. It seemed the exam was over. That's enough, Naruto-kun. Naruto didn't hesitate as Kakashi rested a hand on his shoulder, but continued his work. Naruto withheld the urge to reprimand his older brother for touching him while he was drawing an unfinished seal. I'm helping her. I'm taking it off of her. That seal was placed by Orochimaru of the Sannin, Chunin. That gruff voice could only be Ibiki. Naruto had only ever encountered him as Agent Konoha, so he didn't expect him to realize he wasn't an actual shinobi, but was almost disappointed that the leader of torture and interrogation hadn't realized who he really was by now. Oh no, he just had a soft spot for his little protege. It seemed like he had sponsored and encouraged Anko for this exam and was wary of the repercussions of Naruto's actions against Orochimaru's work. His respect for the man grew for that. I'm not a Chunin, and I know. If this was the Toad Sannin's work I wouldn't dare, but, I should be able to handle this. Naruto sensed their disbelief, even Hiruzen's, but grinned as Kakashi slowly let go and stepped back. When the Hokage spoke, it wasn't for Naruto's benefit. Let's see what he has in store. Naruto felt pride flow through him and his grin grew wider as he began to write. This would be his true test as not only a sealer but as a Jonin. He started by taking 5 minutes to observe the seal. Time he never would have had out in the field. The seal was evil, and a work of art all the same. It preyed upon negative emotion in the user and had other purposes. It was vile and twisted. Naruto's disdain of Orochimaru grew and thoughts of exactly what he'd like to do to the snake summoner were only met with an agreeable growl from Kurama. Hearing stories was one thing. Feeling Kabuto's fear and Hiruzen's regret was one thing. This was almost too much. As the seconds ticked by he became more and more frustrated. The mechanisms of the seal were all wrong. It was just an enhancement seal, it was housing something. It was more like his very own Death Reaper seal than anything else. Kurama realized what he was missing before he could piece it together, and was snarling in pure shock and disgust. His soul. He has implanted his soul within her. Orochimaru's soul. Or a fragment of it. Within another person, another unconsenting person. Disgusting. Degrading. An act born of the shinobi world. His mind raced with possibilities. The soul had to be expunged to remove the mark, that much he knew. If he expelled it out, it would either perish, form a weak body, or latch onto another host. Another host. Orochimaru would threaten anyone in the village. Everyone except for him. He housed the nine-tailed fox. His seal could hold the shade of the Sannin, no matter how twisted it may be. It is the only course we can take at this time. I will handle him from within, Naruto-kun. I'm proud of you. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he worked. There was no specific seal for this, the transference of a soul from one host to a Jinchuriki seal. He'd have to improvise. That was his favorite part of sealing. Be careful, you nearly killed us last time you improvised. I got it, you big baby. If 5 minutes of dissecting a seal was a long time, taking 30 minutes to draw out a sealing array was a lifetime. When he completed the last brush stroke, he took a deep breath he didn't know he needed and allowed his senses to expand to their usual strength and reach. He realized that most of the injured had been cleared from the field, and only one medic nin remained hovering over a worried and obstinate Kurenai. It seemed that Anko had more people who truly cared for her than she realized. He resealed his brush and sighed. Someone must have kept Anko asleep as he worked. A subtle genjutsu from Kakashi that wouldn't have interfered with his sealing was his best guess. I must admit, Naruto-kun, that I have never seen a seal like this one. Naruto chuckled sheepishly at the unasked question. Honestly, Gigi, I just made it up. Ibiki's concern and distrust flared like the sun. He took one step and opened his mouth but found himself frozen in place by a quick look from Hiruzen. The aging Kage sighed and tried his best to look over his student's work. Well, I must confess, it seems like it will work. You intend to reseal it within the Yondaime's seal. Naruto could have nodded, but he had already resolved himself not to lie to his guardian again, and not when the welfare of one of his shinobi was on the line. There is a fragment of Orochimaru within the seal, that is what I will be transferring to me. It is the only way. Any other Kage would have denied it. Not only was Naruto not a true seal master, he was not a true shinobi yet, and he was a Jinchuriki. Any chance of damaging one of a village's strongest weapons was a terrible idea. Naruto knew this. Kurama had taught him as much. But Hiruzen Sarutobi only smiled in faith of his student and nodded his head. Do it. The seal activated and Naruto watched as a dark and sickly purple chakra began to flow from Anko's neck and into his stomach. It burned. It was akin to condensed negative emotion. As it entered his chakra network, he grit his teeth from the pain and rested his forehead on Anko's. Kurama's chakra was quickly overcoming the vile intrusion and breaking it down, stopping it from coalescing within the seal. This will take time, Naruto-kun, but I will endeavor to reduce his chakra so that his influence will not work its whims upon you. Be wary though, this will only end when you have completely absorbed every last trace of his chakra. I understand, thank you. He sighed in relief when the process was complete and took great joy in the fact that Anko's neck was unmarred by the brand of the snake. He looked up at those watching silently and smiled as tears fell down his face. I saved her. I saved her. Torun and Fu worked quite well together. The benefits of the Yamanaka jutsus with the special technique of the Aburame had been quite a blessing to Danzo in the past. After Konoha had taken over, he had sent them out into the field after assessing their loyalty. They both understood, of course. They had been Danzo's personal bodyguards. Of any root agents, they were the most likely to still resemble loyalty to the War Hawk. The fact that Konoha was even younger than Torun spoke volumes of his skill and prowess as a shinobi. He even seemed to have Danzo's respect. Yet, in making use of their skills, it did more for Konoha's benefit than retiring them as Konoha had done to more insubordinate agents. That being said, even the emotionless pair had some apprehension about their current mission. To locate Roshi, Jinchuriki of the Yonbi in the middle of the land of Earth. Getting as far as they had into the farmlands of Iwa had not been easy, and yet they had done it. They had posed as young rice merchants and so far it had worked wonders. Torun's bugs had been spread insanely thin to find some trace of their foe. And they had found his trail. Only to realize that he had found them. Torun and Fu worked quite well together, and that was the only thing keeping them alive as they fled the angered Jinchuriki. Torun cursed as Fu pulled him out of the way of a gout of lava. Have you sent the message to headquarters? Of course, what do I look like? He was cut off as the ground erupted around them and magma walled off their escape. The form of Roshi slowly walked towards them, lava dripping from his body. Now, why don't you boys stand still for a bit and tell me who sent you and what you want? Torun ground his teeth as Fu sighed in defeat. Fu sat down and utilized his training to appear emotionless. Torun was not as experienced as him and Konoha had stopped all emotional conditioning. He was forced to hold his terror back with every ounce of self-control he had. We were sent to find you by our master. He wishes to speak to you both. Roshi snorted and crossed his arms. The older shinobi had red hair and an unamused expression on his face. He did not wear the traditional garb of a shinobi. His armor was more consistent with the attire of the warring clans era than anything else. Who? Me and Han. Fat chance. No, you and Son Goku. Torun nearly bit off his tongue when he realized that he and Fu were held up in the air by their necks, almost pressed into the wall of lava. Torun couldn't help but marvel at the show of power. The control over the lava to not burn them even from that distance was terrifying. The man was a monster. How does he know that name? We don't know, but he'd like to speak with you. He said that he and Kurama had something to ask of you. A favor and a deal. Fu was a much better talker than Torun was, because if it had been him to open his mouth he was pretty sure he would have fucked it up. Torun was regretting not getting benched. Konoha was crazy. Danzo wouldn't have thrown his assets away so brazenly. They were going to die here because the child had overestimated his hand and Roshi was going to call his bluff and. Fine. 1 week, that's all I'm giving him. Torun and Fu didn't wait to thank the merciful Jinchuriki. They ran. Naruto stood at attention alongside Kurenai in the Hokage's office. She had been bandaged up, and had her tendons repaired. Naruto had apologized and had been scolded by Kakashi for using such a technique against fellow shinobi, but Kurenai had brushed off the pervert's admonishments and had hugged him. She kindly smiled at him and praised him for the fight. She was pretty great. He liked being around her. He could feel her nervousness as they stood there and almost envied her. He knew what the verdict of the exam had been the instant that he had sensed his Gigi's presence behind him in the field. That still didn't settle his own nerves as the Hokage of Konoha stood up and smiled at them both. That was quite a showing. Kurenai, I wish to commend you and Hayate's performance. Unfortunately, due to the first exam, you and Hayate will not be promoted to full Jonin this exam. Naruto winced as he felt her disappointment and shame. She had desperately wanted to move through the ranks. Well, if the old man would just hurry up and not leave her hanging, she wouldn't feel so bad. He realized his annoyance must have been evident in his stature as the old man chuckled and held up a certificate to her. But, your promotion to Tokobutsu Junin is more than fairly earned. Kurenai smiled widely and slightly teared up. Thank you, Hokage-sama. And, what about Anko Ch-san? After much deliberation, she has also been promoted to Tokobutsu Junin. You may convey the news to her, if you wish. If it was possible, her smile only grew wider and she bowed deeply. Thank you, Hokage-sama. Uzumaki Naruto. His smile disappeared and irrational nervousness entered him once more. He knew he was to be promoted. Full Junin. It was impossible to surprise him. Yet, he feared the answer all the same. Congratulations. You've made your senseis proud. You are hereby instated as a Junin of Konoha. You've earned it. That much is impossible to deny. Naruto teared up. The tears threatened to spill over as his role model, the closest thing to a parent, praised him, and at the message hidden underneath. The one only he would be able to understand. Itachi would be so proud of you, son. He had to wait as Kurenai left to go tell Anko the news, as the Anbu were suddenly dismissed, before he could run forwards and embrace the man who had blessed his life so completely. Thank you, Gigi. I love you. I love you too, Naruto-kun. You've made us all so proud. In that instant, he felt truly happy and focused. He was on the right path, and the way forward was clear to him. He was a tried and true shinobi of the leaf now. It was time to get serious. Anko opened her eyes after making sure that Kurenai was the only one in the room. She was in a hospital room, it seemed. Waking up after combat was always frightening. The uncertainty and disorientation was dangerous. That's why recovering patients were left alone whenever possible. Kurenai must have been really worried to have stayed. Hey, so how'd the promotion go? She smirked as Kurenai smiled in exasperation. You know, Anko, it's good to see that your optimism is still standing strong. Anko grinned at her best and only friend. Yeah, well, I could tell from your face. If you didn't get promoted, then you'd be an icy piece of shit right now. They both laughed and Kurenai scooted forward and grabbed her hand. You know, you really went all out at the end there. I didn't know you could summon a snake that big. It's not about the size, Kurenai-chan, but thanks for appreciating its girth. She laughed loudly as Kurenai smacked her lightly. I'm being serious, Anko. You deserve to get promoted. Did I? Full Junin. Yes and no. Tokobutsu. For both of us. Anko grinned, but it didn't have its usual edge to it. It felt hollow. A half step. She knew that she could have put on a better showing if that kid. The memories of her fight rushed back to her at once and she groaned, "Fuck. I totally just bitched out at the end. I couldn't even. What was that kid's name? Did he get full Jonin? He owes me some fucking dango regardless when I get my hands on him." Anko. Her friend's worried tone made her look to her. Something in Kurenai's voice was off. It was hard to tell if it was good or bad. Yeah. What is it? Well, yes. Naruto-kun was promoted to full Jonin, but Naruto-kun. That kid is the reason that we didn't pass the first. Anko. At the end of the fight between you two, your cursed seal acted up, and then her blood ran cold and she grit her teeth. What? Did he see it? Try to kill me? No, Anko, he removed it. The room was dominated by silence and then Anko yanked her hand away from Kurenai. Bullshit. Don't fuck with me about that. Anko, he did. It's gone now and they said it was permanent. I tried to take it off, I cut off the skin it was on, it was there underneath. It can't be removed. Anko. Her friend was crying now and handed her a small mirror. Look. Just look. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed the mirror. She didn't know what scared her more as she raised it up to her neck. To realize Kurenai was playing some cruel joke on her. Or it was gone. All she saw was her unblemished fucking neck. Pristine. Empty. Hers. She was free, and had been unconscious during what would have been one of the happiest moments of her life. Where is he? Where do I find him? I'm either gonna punch him or kiss him and I'm going to do it now. So stop looking at me like that and tell me where I can find Naruto fucking Uzumaki immediately. They damn better have given him Jonin for this. She didn't even realize that she had started crying before Kurenai laughed and started to cry harder herself. As her friend embraced her, she realized that it was a sunny day outside. She had forgotten how bright the sun could be. It had been a long time since she had noticed it. The sky was so blue, and she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So she sat there in the arms of her best friend, and she did both. Naruto trained unlike any other ninja before him. Every day he made 200 clones and sent them out to predetermined areas of study. He, Kurama, and the Hokage had talked quite in depth about the limits of his schedule and how much he should or should not push himself. Naruto could easily make 1,000 clones a day, but for maximum effect Kurama and Sarutobi had forced him to stick with 200. 200 clones a day that trained each for 6 hours. 1,200 hours of memories a day plus his own memories stacked on top. Near a year and a half of training in 2 days. Now, in all fairness, in some areas it was not the same. Muscle memory was almost completely lost in translation, so his taijutsu was handled by himself nearly every day. The majority of his clones focused on chakra control, ninjutsu, some attempts at genjutsu that never really seemed to go anywhere, but Jiji and Kakashi and Kabuto were adamant he worked on it, so whatever, and book reading. The libraries of Konoha had been inundated with hanged Naruto clones, and due to how frequently they were in them it had started a recent societal trend of increasing the popularity of reading. The village as a whole had become more literate, and book sales had begun to go through the roof. Of course, some clones were at a loss. The Yamanaka were getting annoyed. Naruto couldn't turn his empathy off. That was by design, of course, but Kurama even admitted that it might have been a good idea to mute it every now and then. The Mind Walker clan had gotten wind from one of their own who had the unfortunate pleasure of being in Naruto's Jonin exam and they were out to catch him. Hiruzen still adamantly protected his identity, but there were 200 shadow clones in the village. Every day. Most of them were in the Hokage's personal training ground, but the Yamanakas had started to realize that the libraries were full of empaths. Then they realized that they were shadow clones and that, well, if a clone was cornered it was popped. The Yamanakas were prideful and apparently they were somewhat offended that the Hokage had a shinobi that could beat their own ninjutsus. They felt threatened. Naruto completely understood how they were reacting. It was just annoying that he had to constantly be on alert for them. He had grown tremendously. Kabuto placed him at mid-A rank without any of Kurama's chakra. He was 7 years old and was already quite the little killer. Naruto was proud of how far he had come. Especially from having been an Anbu previously. He finally felt that he had earned his position in the village. Now he just had to make a name for himself. He was currently working on his taijutsu when he felt the sudden rush of memories of a clone on the outskirts. Someone was coming. His clones immediately began to dissipate into clouds of smoke, and he put on his dopiest smile and turned as the intruder entered his sense, only to realize who it was. Anko Mitarashi. She was still somewhat bandaged up, but she was limping towards him quite determinedly. Her emotions were a whirlwind, and Naruto felt himself freeze up as she walked right up to him. She knelt down and looked him in the eyes. Naruto. She leant forwards and hugged him. Thank you. Thank you. She clutched him tightly and he didn't know what to do. He slowly hugged her back but was at a loss as to how to react. How did you do it? She pulled back and looked into his eyes, her brown eyes watery and red from crying. How did I do what? She frowned and her eyes scanned him for tells. It seems she had learned a lot while under Ibiki. You know what I'm asking. How did you take it off? He sighed and looked away uncomfortably. I can't tell you how I knew what to do, but I like sealing. Is that enough? She was scared, confused, and frustrated. If he didn't have his empathy, he wouldn't have detected a single bit of her inner turmoil from the soft smile she was giving him. Yeah, kid, that's fine. Well, thank you. I can't wait to see what you got. Sorry. She laughed and ruffled his hair just like Itachi used to do. You don't get to perform a miracle for me and then get away, kid. Someone's gotta teach you how to enjoy being a Jonin, and I have decided to look after you. He nearly grimaced. Well, doesn't that seem odd? I mean, shouldn't I be your senpai? He paled as he realized what he had done, as he saw her snake-like grin, and she wrapped one arm over his shoulders and pulled him tightly to her side. Ooh, so little kid already wants a hottie to be his kahai, eh? Is that how it is? And no, I am much too young to be thinking about getting a girlfriend. Damn straight, kid. I know I'm sexy, but we got more important things to worry about. Like you helping me and Kurenai ace our next Junin exam. You know how to get the inside scoop. You made a joke of that last one. You owe us, kid, and I'll make sure that you pay out. He groaned as she picked him up and started walking him to the village. He hadn't realized what he had invited into his ordered life. She was walking chaos, and it seemed she had decided that she liked him now. But, I'm busy. Nope. She sung childishly. I know how many shadow clones you can make. It's impossible for you to ever be busy. He paled once again. She knew. There'd be no denying her now. Just get used to it, Naruto-kun. We're going to be the best of buds now. We're Junin of Konoha. It's time to celebrate. Agent Konoha stood before the latest messenger. Kabuto stood at his side, as his personal bodyguard. He didn't trust anyone en route, and he was Naruto's last line of defense from betrayal. He wore a snake mask and was referred to as Agent Snake, at Naruto's request. A little on the nose. Kabuto worried that Danzo already knew of his identity and was just biding his time. Master Konoha-sama, we have heard word from Torun and Fu. They have located Roshi and have delivered your message. He awaits you in 3 days' time. Thank you. Dismissed. The messenger nodded and disappeared from view, and Naruto sighed and slumped into his seat. Roshi didn't give us much time, apparently. It's a trap. If you arrive, you will be worn ragged and exhausted from the journey alone. You know this, yes. I do. Yet, you are still adamant about this. I have to speak with him. Especially if he is actually going to give me a chance. Take a squad with you. No, they'd slow me down. I'll meet up with Fu and Torun, they shall be my guard. How will Naruto Uzumaki justify heading out to Iwa on his own? Naruto grinned, and Kabuto's blood boiled. He would always grin like that when he thought he had done something clever. Kakashi let me know that Iwa and Kumo are having another summit. It's the perfect time for me to head to Iwa. Kabuto knew that the only way he could convince Naruto not to go was to play on their friendship. To beg him not to. He stood in front of him and put his hands on the boy's shoulders. He looked him in the eye. Naruto. That was when a snake slivered from out of the shadows and up to Kabuto. They both looked down at it. It was white with red eyes, and in its jaws was a note. In that instant the roles were reserved. Naruto's hands latched onto his as he pulled away. You don't have to go, Kabuto-kun. You're not ready yet, please. The irony of the situation was almost too much for him as he smiled helplessly. He had to go. They both had to leave each other when it was the worst thing to do. We have to do this, Naruto-kun. It's okay, I'll come back if you do. Promise. The boy's eyes steeled as his words from when they first met came back to him. You can't break a promise, and I promise that I won't break any of mine. It's a promise, Naruto-kun. A promise of a lifetime. Kabuto was watching that night as Naruto left the village. The copycat, Kakashi, had walked him to the village gates to see him off. Kabuto knew someone would have. Someone that could move freely in the village, that wasn't constricted to the shadows. Someone who lived in the light of the world. He stilled as Kakashi looked up at him. The Anbu commander couldn't have known who he was, masked and in the shadows of the rooftops, but he closed his eye as he smiled and nodded. It seemed he didn't care who Kabuto was, he knew why he was there and was appreciative. Good. At the very least it seemed Kakashi didn't mind breaking the rules if it was for Naruto's sake. Kabuto wondered to himself how far Hitaki would go for the boy. He didn't realize that he was still thinking of Naruto until he was already halfway to sound. He was worried and there was nothing he could do. Goddamn, he had forgotten how hard it was to care for people. Shisui cursed as he once more burnt his hand pouring tea. Rehabilitation was a slow process, but it was one that had been fervently pursued. He had been known as Shunshin no Shisui, or Shisui of the body flicker. The Shunshin was one of the peaks of agility and accuracy. A title like that demanded dexterity and precision, of mastery of one's own body. How low he had come, to where he was pouring scalding tea onto his own rested hand and missing the cup entirely. He was in some cabin on the outskirts of the village. A safe house. The windows were all boarded off, not that it made much difference to him. He was constantly in the darkness. That was the worst part. Always living in the pure blackness. The colors of his memories were so vivid, he didn't even know what color his clothes were. Uchiha were not made for blindness. It would drive the weakest of them mad. Shisui Uchiha wasn't weak. That's what he told himself. He bitched, brooded as was customary of an Uchiha, but he was working on his rehabilitation consistently. Konoha-sama had been rather helpful in that regard. He had provided him with several alternatives that would allow him to once more become fighting fit. A genjutsu to place on himself that would allow him to see sound. If his opponents realized how he was seeing, then they could use loud noises against him. Good, but not perfect. A chakra technique that included sending pulses of chakra out into his surroundings to get an echolocation. Costly and not very subtle. No, he had not found the right fit, but he was working consistently to try to find something that would work. He gave up before and it cost him his clan and his eyes. He had promised to never give up again. He wouldn't fail. He cursed as he accidentally knocked his teacup off his little table and it broke on the floor. I hate tea. Itachi sipped his tea and eyed the villagers of Kirigakure from beneath the brim of the absurd hat that was apparently Akatsuki uniform. A black cloak with red clouds, nail polish, and wide hats with bells and ribbon attached. Not very subtle, but when you only had the best of the best wearing them, Itachi supposed that it made up for it. He had paired up with Biwa, who was something of a buffoon. A loud mouth. The wielder of the Kubikiribocho, or executioner's blade. The idiot was wearing it in the middle of the village. Itachi was just waiting for it to be noticed to make his escape. He wouldn't sabotage any of the organization's missions himself, but if his partner wanted to out of idiocy, he wouldn't stop him. He almost wished Naruto was here to see if Biwa was looking to start in a fight in the village he had defected from. He blinked and had to take a second to catch his breath. That had been the first time in a few months that he had allowed himself to think of his brother. He had devoted himself to the work handed to him from Madara and was content to bide his time until Sasuke was strong enough to avenge the Uchiha clan. When his attention was brought back to the present, it was to Biwa grinning widely at a figure walking down the street towards them. The Yondaime Mizukage. Yagura Karataki. Jinchuriki of the Sanbi. Well, Itachi-san, it looks like we get to see if we are really strong enough to take on a Jinchuriki-like leader says. Come. We're leaving. Itachi didn't wait and cast a quick genjutsu to hide their escape. He knew that he couldn't fool the cage for long, but he had no intention of fighting in the very center of Kiri. No, it would be better to fight amongst the trees even if it was filled with mist. He wouldn't die here. Not yet. Naruto would be devastated. I wasn't pleased. He was a simple man. Of simple pleasures. Sitting across from him was the Sandaime Tsuchikage, Onoki of both scales. They were discussing the current political climate and the finer points of the Konoha-Kumo alliance. I had thought that they would be of similar minds in how to proceed against the Konohan threat, but Onoki seemed perfectly fine with scheduling summit after summit. They had been meeting for more than a year with no results. I decided that it didn't matter which nation he was talking to, Konoha or Iwa. Any Sandaime was a pain in his ass. I think we should call the meeting here, Reikage Dono. We have covered enough for now. Are your accommodations to your liking? Yes, Tsuchikage Dono. The room is fine. When are we meeting next? I hope to finalize our talks and decide on some course of action. I am tired of waiting. Very well. The next time we speak we will finalize our plans. Very well. Arose from his seat and left the chamber, Darui at his side. What news, Darui? His right hand sensed his frustrations and got right to the important details. We believe that Iwa is going to go ahead with the plan to attack Konoha. They are marshalling a force of over 1,500. It seems that Onoki was not able to dissuade the daimyo from inaction. They will commit and assist us in our plans. Onoki is smart. If he wanted to fully commit, he'd send 10 times as many shinobi. Be ready. He and I will be the center point of the Kumo task force, with Iwa's Jinchuriki being their main assets. Yes, but, well, I have some intel that I can't determine the validity of. Oh, yes, it comes from one of our men, who had been imprisoned in Konoha until this point. Stopped. He got a feeling in his gut that he wouldn't like what was going to be said. And what message does he bring from the prisons of Konoha? That Iwa is going to be losing one of their Jinchuriki. Snarled and punched a nearby wall. It shattered into dust and he and Darui were met with the terrified screams of a young couple on their honeymoon. Darui stayed behind to placate the couple and the shocked and angry hotel staff in a storm to his room barking for his shinobi. He had to verify this information. If Iwa wasn't able to bring their full might into this invasion, then it would be Kumo that suffered the greater losses. It seems that the old monkey's sight and reach was far. He still remembered the threats made against his own Jinchuriki. If Konoha was going to start retaking the tailed beasts, then the rest of the 5 great nations, and the lesser villages would rise up in protest. If they took the 4 tails, then these plans would have to be scrapped. It wouldn't mean the end, though. It just meant that he'd have to be smarter. Naruto walked into the clearing and felt the magma cooking underneath. He hadn't stopped running for nearly 3 days, and his guards had been exhausted by the journey. He was insanely glad for his Uzumaki stamina and Kurama's influence, or else he never would have been able to make it. He had been brought to a section of forest that had been leveled down and replaced with a sheet of obsidian floor. Standing across from him was Roshi. It couldn't be anyone else. He sensed the yonbi in him clear as day. Good day, thank you for meeting me. I am Naruto Uzumaki, Jinchuriki of Kurama the Nine-Tailed Fox. Naruto sensed Roshi's distrust spike, but he walked forwards all the same. They stood apart, 2 titans of their villages. In a meeting that was treasonous at best. I'm Roshi, but I'm guessing you know that. Whatever you have to say, save it. Me and Goku have thought things through, and before we say any more we want to see where you two are at. Naruto gulped as Roshi's body was suddenly overcome by a vicious red chakra, and 2 tails grew out of his back. The Jinchuriki of Iwa grinned a bloody smile and spoke with a voice that could only be described as demonic. Well, come on, kid. Let us see the strength of the Jinchuriki of the 9 tails. Lava started to shoot up from the ground and Naruto yelped as he dodged the heavy swings that aimed to separate his head from his body. I thought you said he'd be willing to talk. The damn monkey was always a bit unpredictable. He's the kind that talks things out with his fists. How was I supposed to know he'd want his vessel to fight a child? Get back. Naruto jumped back as Roshi opened his mouth and shot a stream of lava towards him. This was not going according to plan. Hopefully Kabuto was having an easier time than him. Tell me, Kabuto-kun. What do you know about the Akatsuki from Sasori of the Red Sands? Kabuto smiled and tried to hold in his panic. He could do this. He could lie to Orochimaru and get away with it. Nothing. Oh gods, he was going to die today. It wasn't even time for lunch yet. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next video as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.